Order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderman Ornowitz.
Excused.
Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Howard. Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Here.
Chairman Vaccaro.
Present.
President Reed. 7 present, you have quorum.
Okay, we got to start with the minutes from the October 10th meeting. Has everybody read the minutes, and do we have a motion to accept them?
I make the motion to accept the minutes from our next meeting.
I'll second that motion. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Ornowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Howard. Alderman Muhammad.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
Chairman Vaccaro.
Aye.
President Reed.
Okay, so just kind of the order of business is going to be, we're going to do Board Bill 106 first. And I think Lewis, the president, has one speaker that he wants to speak, and then we're going to listen and then move on. Second bill we're going to take up is the International Swimming Pool and Spa. And then after that, the police chief's here, which thank you for showing up. And we have a couple bills that he would also like to comment on. So that's kind of the order of business. So President Reed, if you would like to come up and talk about your board bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Board Bill 106 is a pretty simple bill, as you can see. What the bill does, it requires federally licensed gun dealers to report to the law enforcement in the city of St. Louis anytime anyone fails a background check, right? And you know, that helps us in multiple different ways, and I know you're tight on time this morning, so I would like to bring up Randy Steffen from Moms Demand Action
Randy,
to talk a little bit more
and then
about that.
sign your name so we have it for our minutes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me today. My name's Randy Steffen, and I've been a member of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America for over 2 years. I'm the treasurer for the state of Missouri, but spend most of my time supporting St. Louis activities because I live in St. Louis. As many of you know, Moms Demand Action has been at the Board of Aldermen meetings several times over the last few months. We were here in June to raise awareness about Wear Orange, and we've been around a lot lately to express our support for Cure Violence. We understand that gun violence impacts our city every day, and the impacts on the victims' families, witnesses, and the entire community are vast. That's why I'm happy to testify on behalf of Board Bill 106 today. Every single day in the United States, 100 people are killed by guns, and many more are injured. The data has shown that stronger gun laws make us safer. The state of Missouri has some of the laxest gun laws in the country, and hence, we have 3 cities identified with some of the highest gun violence in the country: St. Louis, Kansas City, and Springfield. Missouri gun deaths have risen 55% since 2008, when our gun laws began to loosen. Right now, the FBI conducts background checks on gun buyers who are attempting to purchase at a licensed gun dealer. The FBI is not required to alert St. Louis authorities when a prohibited person fails a background check, even though that person has likely committed a crime. As a result, local law enforcement may not have the opportunity to follow up and investigate or make an arrest. These people can just walk out of the gun store and illegally get a gun another way. The reasons we support this specific bill are that prohibited people who attempt to buy guns represent a serious public safety threat. Prohibited people who fail background checks are at a 28% higher risk of arrest in 5 years after denial than the 5 years preceding it. 30% of criminals who try to buy a gun and fail the background check are rearrested within 5 years. The most common reasons for failed background checks are that the would-be gun buyer is a felon, a fugitive from justice, or a domestic abuser. Prohibited people who attempt to buy guns are often committing a crime. Federal and state law prohibits potential gun buyers from lying on their background check form, but federal and state officials rarely prosecute these crimes. This bill will allow local law enforcement to act to keep guns out of the hands of people with dangerous histories. The local law enforcement might have additional knowledge about which of these would-be gun buyers have already had problems with domestic abuse or other violent crimes. We want law enforcement to have the information they need to help prevent the next crime from happening, to keep our families and our communities safe. A number of other states are already taking action, and it's working. In Washington State, for example, 669 denials were reported to local law enforcement between July of 2017 and July of 2018, the law's first year. Of these, 192 individuals were named on active protective orders, 255 individuals with an in-state felony conviction, and 264 were prohibited individuals who made multiple attempts to purchase. In Pennsylvania, failed background checks gave rise to an average of over 5,000 investigations per year, and charges were brought in about 12% of these cases. In conclusion, we support Board Bill 106 because it will help save lives. It's about enforcing the law, plain and simple.
Thank you. So,
That's it, and I'll open up
okay,
any
so
questions.
just real quickly, so I think it's a good bill. I'm just going to say I think it's good. I agree with what you said earlier. It might end up with a court challenge. So did our cigarette smoking, which we led the way on, and other bills where the city of St. Louis set the pace. And, so anyway, rather than delay things, I'm just going to go across. Alderwoman Hubbard, any questions? Well, did they get used too mixed up on this sheet? Let me go a different way. Apparently it's out of order. Okay, so then we'll go with Alderwoman Howard.
It should be Alderman. Are you on the committee, Alderman Boyd? Right.
Oh, well, she's vice chair. Let me go to the top. I always do the chairman and vice chairman last. I'm sorry.
Thank you, I have no questions.
They're straightening my sheet out as we speak. So, thank you, vice chairman. I always kind of save us for the end so we can.
Save the best for last.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, now my sheet's all straightened out. Okay, so Howard, you're now, Alderwoman Howard, please, any questions?
I guess the only thing I have to say is that I would hope that the law enforcement could take advantage of this information and use it to prosecute some crimes, but I'm not sure if, are they,
They're not here to speak on it.
law enforcement are not here to
No, I
speak on it?
asked, they said they had no.
Okay. So hopefully that would be, it seems innocuous, that it would be good information in following up with crime. So could I please have my name added to it?
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman.
Now, Alderwoman Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I would like my name added as a sponsor, co-sponsor as well to President Reed.
Yeah,
I
thank you,
think
Alderwoman.
this is a great bill. We definitely need to just do something so we can address the influx of guns in our community. And I just have one quick question. So once this data is compiled or whatever, or if a person doesn't pass the background check, who looks at that list? Where is that information stored?
You want to talk to them?
Currently, they go through the NICS system to get checked on the background system, on the background check, and what will happen is that if they fail, that the FBI will need to notify the St. Louis Police Department.
Okay, and then once they notify the department, what does the department do with that information?
It's up to the department, to use that in any ongoing investigations or anything.
Okay, and probably investigate like why this person's trying to get a gun or something. Okay, all right. Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman John Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions. Mr. President, I applaud you for presenting this board bill. I think this is common sense legislation that cities around the state and the country should adopt. And I commend Moms Demand Action Against Gun Violence. Thank you for this bill, and I'm proud to co-sponsor it along with you.
All right, thank you.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
I don't have any questions either, just thank you to both of you all for bringing this forward, and I would like to add my name as well.
Perfect, thank you.
And I think my name's on it, so I will take a motion. In fact, I'll even make a motion that we pass Board Bill 106 out with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderman Ornowitz, Alderwoman Hubbard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard,
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad,
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard,
Aye.
Chairman Vaccaro,
Aye.
President Reed.
Aye.
7 aye votes.
I just want to thank you all so much for getting that done, and I appreciate it. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you, guys. And thanks.
So thank you, guys, and thank you, the people that showed up to speak on this. It's not that I didn't want you to speak, but we have so much to do, and I think the results you're looking for are here. So, okay, Vice Chairman Jeffrey Boyd, you're recognized on Board Bill 89.
Madam Clerk, will you add me to 106?
Oh, yeah, and if I'm not on there, you can put me on there also.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Board Bill 89 is an amendment to the plumbing code that deals with swimming pools and spas. And I'm going to have Building Commissioner Frank Oswald and any one of his staff members come up and kind of explain to you the technical changes that are being proposed. And if there's anybody that wants to speak on it, we'll have the sign-up sheet up here.
And I think that Don Summers had said, and I think that's what we'll just go with those two. We'll go with Frank, we'll go with Don Summers, and that should be fair.
Thank you, honorable members of the committee. This morning, I wanted to just briefly introduce you guys to the concept of the pool and spa code. What this basically is the International Building Code. I think Alderman Boyd mentioned that it was part of the plumbing code. It's actually part of the building code is what.
No, Frank, it's actually independent.
Well,
Please come, if you're going to speak, you got to speak in that microphone.
It's part of our family of codes, and what we're doing is what the International Code Council has done is broken out the pool section out of the building code from the past. So what I've done this morning is I brought our engineer, Ron Brendel here. Ron will talk a little about that, and then we'll be available for any questions.
Okay, Mr. Brendel, and please, if you could speak in the microphone.
Yeah, as we said, it's an independent code. What happened in the 2000 cycle, they took all the provisions of about pool, spas, hot tubs out of the building code and the residential code and put them in this book. Well, this is the 18 version rather than the 12, but so we sort of lost track of it, and now in the 18 residential and building code, it says for pools and spas, refer to this book. Well, it ain't in the book and it ain't in the code anymore because it's here and we haven't adopted this yet. So that's basically what we're trying to do is get the pool and spa code into our family of codes.
Okay. Let's go down, well, you're up there. So, Alderwoman Howard, any questions for Mr. Brendel?
So this would be a standalone, it follows the international rather than the,
Yeah, it's the same as all the rest of the codes, the building code, the residential code, existing building, plumbing, or not plumbing, mechanical, fuel, gas. There's, I think we have 8 or 9 codes right now.
so we're taking this out of the plumbing code and
No.
making it
No.
a standalone
No,
code?
it's not out of, it was in the residential, the building code and the residential code. It doesn't touch the plumbing code at all. In fact, the only thing that it does do in terms of the plumbing code is if you look at the last page of the, or almost last page of it, we have added the, under chapter, where it says chapter, I think it's 11, damn it.
Okay, they probably gonna do yours probably last after
Chapter 11 is amended. We had to put in the Uniform Plumbing Code because it is not listed as one of the reference standards in this code.
So it references it.
So it references it now so that, and anytime we have in the ordinance itself, or the board bill itself, it says plumbing code. It doesn't indicate any specific plumbing code. It says plumbing code.
Okay. Okay, so this will apply only to public spas or to all spas and pools?
It's both. It's,
Public and private?
Yes, ma'am.
And it would be ones that are temporary and permanent? In other words, if you had an above-ground pool,
Well, basically, we've thrown above-ground pools out, but they don't apply in here. However, there is a provision where they have to be 6 foot off of property lines. That's about the only thing.
but
and
if they have a
childproof fence.
circulation system, it applies to them?
I don't believe the plumbing code, or the above-ground pools are not in the building code. Other than the fact that we say they have to be 6 foot off of property lines and have childproof fences.
Okay. So none of the electrical or any of the things that apply to an
The
above-ground pool
electrical code
are
deals on
covered?
itself with like wires over and things like that, but
The building code addresses that?
no, it would be the electrical code would deal with
Well,
that.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's all.
Alderwoman Tamika Hubbard.
No question.
Alderman John Mohammed.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Pam hasn't made it yet, she's running late. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard?
No question.
And I have none, and so I know that the, if,
Plumbers and
yeah,
packers.
Mr. Summers, if you want to come up, we want to allow him to speak. And then Jeffrey, you're allowed to close after he gets done speaking, unless someone has questions for Mr. Summers.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Don Summers. I'm a licensed plumber for the last 40 years in St. Louis City and St. Louis County. And when I heard this bill was coming up, I pulled it up off the internet and did some review. And from the plumbing standpoint, I have found several things that are not consistent with what the bill is trying to do. I have some handouts, if I could,
Oh,
Mr.
sure,
Chairman.
absolutely. Just give them to the clerk, she'll pass them out.
Thank you.
Pam will be here, she's just running late. Yeah, there we go, John.
I've gone through the bill, and I've tried to go page by page and line by line so that we can all look at the same thing. So the first section was on page 4, line 18, section 102.7, which is the reference codes and standards. Chapter 11 of the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code references all the international codes, as the gentleman before me said, the International Building Code, the International Fuel Gas Code, Mechanical Code, and so forth. The city does not adopt the International Plumbing Code. They have adopted the Uniform Plumbing Code. So in the reference standards, it does say the International Plumbing Code under Chapter 11. So that would not apply. And then the second part was on page 4, and it goes on to page 5, lines 23, and then lines 1 through 4, which is section 102.7.1, application of the international codes. Again, the residential code of the city of St. Louis refers to the plumbing code. It doesn't say the uniform or international plumbing code, it just says the plumbing code, which again, the city has adopted the uniform plumbing code and not the international plumbing code. And again, 102.7 is talking about the international codes. So again, there is a conflict there. And then the next one is on page 20, line 20, 21, and 22. There's a section 302.5 on backflow prevention. Again, it's section 102.71 that we just spoke of refers to the reference codes and standards in Chapter 11 of the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. Again, which that references all the international codes. And again, the same for the next couple, the 302.6 wastewater discharge, 302.6.9.1 hose bibs, and also 318.2 protection of potable water systems. Again, they all reference the international codes, but again, the city adopts the Uniform Plumbing Code. So again, those are all in conflict. And then the last part that I found was on page 22, line 3 through 9, chapter 11 is amended as follows. And again, the gentleman before me said that they have put a section of the Uniform Plumbing Code 2009 for my ATMO into the chapter 11. When I was reviewing that, I was looking through the 2009 Uniform Plumbing Code, and I found that they have listed sections, section 201.3, 302.2, 302.5, and 302.6, and 309.1. They don't even exist in the Uniform Plumbing Code. So I don't know how they could even reference those, because they don't even exist. So with all these confusing and contradictions, I would like to see the committee either table this bill or reject it, because again, the plumbing code is for the safety and health of the public. And if we're going to be adopting a bill that has all these conflicts, I don't think we're doing our citizens justice. Thank you.
Let me go down the list just because. Alderwoman Howard, any questions?
I guess this is not a question for you, it's a question for the sponsor,
Well, and we're
but
going to bring
that's
him,
okay, I'll
we'll bring
wait.
him back up.
No questions.
Alderwoman Tamika Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have some concerns. Have you all been in communication with, I guess, the building division or whatever? Like, has there been any communication? Have you all, like what you're conveying to us, have you been able to speak with Mr. Oswald or just give your opinion on how this may be some form of duplication or something that we may not necessarily need?
No, I have not. Until this morning, we had no idea who the submitter of the bill was. So there was no way I could communicate with them.
Okay, and so would you all be open to communicating, or do you have like a response to what their concerns are?
Oh, I mean,
I'm sorry, he's not up here, but he's in the room.
yeah,
I'm
no,
just-
I would love to sit down and talk to somebody about it. Yes, definitely.
Oh, okay, thank you, no further.
Okay, I would just say that our bills are online at least, you know, there's no way you should really have to see that this morning for anybody in the room. Our bills are online. We have to have them filed by Tuesday, or they won't even accept them by that Friday. So they're usually at least a solid week ahead of time before they, you know. Plus, then it would have been read already in committee before it was even assigned here. So this bill's probably been out there for 2 weeks.
Well, we knew Mr. Boyd was the sponsor, but I didn't know Mr. Oswald drafted it. So I could not communicate with Mr. Oswald.
Okay, and I would just say in the future, you might want to call, even when I'm a sponsor of a bill, I can tell you, somebody else is helping me write it, or I'm writing it with their help because I'm not an attorney, and certainly we have an attorney. But I was just saying, if you need to look, and that's just on any bill, just so anybody in the room would know, you can find our bills online.
That's how he found it.
Huh?
That's how
No,
he
he said he
found
just
it.
found it today.
No,
He said he just heard it this morning.
Well, and I just found out today that Mr. Oswald was going to speak on it and
but you had the bill before
Yeah, I had the
because you
bill.
wrote
Okay.
all these responses. It's not
Yes.
like you
Okay.
did this morning.
No, I've seen the bill, and we knew, again, Mr.
Oh,
Boyd
okay.
was the sponsor of the bill. We just didn't know who actually helped write the bill.
Okay.
That we could get together with.
That's fair.
Okay, I understand, and you can always get a hold of sponsors, they should always help. Alderman John Muhammad. Oh, were you done?
Yes, I was.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
Pam's not here. Alderwoman Shameen Clark Hubbard?
No questions.
No questions, and I don't. If Mr. Brendel, you can stay up here too, please. If you would like to speak, and then Jeffrey, if nobody has questions for any of the three of them, after hearing both, then Jeffrey,
I'm just responding to
close or
his
whatever you do.
comment. Let's go backwards. He talks about under Chapter 11 where we added we have like 201.3, 302.2. If you look at those sections, those portions of, well, page, let's take the first one, 201 point, no, it might not be on yours. Yeah, but that's here. But on page 22, where we're adopting Chapter 11, or changing Chapter 11 by adding things,
What page do you want us on? Are you on the board bill or on some?
I'm on the board bill.
Okay, what page?
On page 22, line 9 of at least what I printed this morning.
Okay.
Dang it, pages are all messed up. It says 201.3.
Okay.
Okay, 201.3, if you go to it on page, should be on 19 if I can find it, yeah. It says terms not defined. We have this, and it says, notice on line 13, plumbing code. It doesn't say which plumbing code, and that's what we did, is we said we're not going to define it as the International Plumbing Code or the Uniform or any other plumbing code. That's the same thing that was captioned on 302.2, 302.5, 302.6, 306.91, all those. When we went through, we took those sections out. We're changing them in the book to just say, instead of International Plumbing Code, Plumbing Code.
So that's the plumbing code we are presently under, whatever one that is. So when we're presently under IAMPO.
So that,
And
it's
that's
like a generic,
Generic.
because
Yeah, so
whichever
it
one we're
refers to our
under,
existing plumbing code.
It just, to whatever plumbing code the building division is under at that time, at any time.
Then maybe, I'm sorry.
And that basically covers the same ideas of everything else he said. It's a generic term of plumbing code rather than a specific plumbing code.
okay, I understand it because of the two codes that we're going to hear later Alderwoman Howard, you were wanting to say something.
I would suggest that we kind of put the cart before the horse. Why don't we hear the other bill?
Well,
Fine.
it's not, it may not, it could be 6 months from now. We're going to start they're not even.
This is independent of anything dealing with a plumbing code
I
future.
guess maybe I need to talk to the sponsor.
Well, we're going to let the sponsor close on it. Does anyone have any questions for any of Mr. Summers or Frank or
Just for clarification, so you said generic. So do you mean the plumbing code that we have now is not the plumbing code that this will pertain to?
It'll apply to any plumbing code that the city is under at any time.
Is the city under the same code are we together? The city and the county, are they the same codes?
At the moment, yes. Well, I don't know what the county's under, to tell you the truth.
The county just adopted the 2015 Uniform Plumbing Code as of October 1st.
Okay,
But we are not in sync with them with the building code. They're working on the 15, we've already adopted the 18. We've got progressive.
okay.
City is under the most current. In fact, next week, I'm going to Las Vegas to be part of the passing of what will be the 21 building codes and residential code, and I believe the energy code is being heard also. So we are up to date as of today. But like I said, next week, they're going to do the final hearings on what will be the 21 codes. So we are trying to progress. The city is moving forward instead of staying behind.
I guess I'm still just confused, so I'll just wait. I'm a little confused of what the difference is then. What the difference? Yeah.
I think,
Can you
Can
speak?
I
Yeah.
ask a question?
sure, but I think what they're saying is they left it generic so that right now we're under under one set of codes, but that code changes year to year. I mean, it could change at any time. We're getting ready, they're going to hear, we just passed last year the 2018 overall code. The only thing that wasn't in it was the plumbers and pipe fitters. We have two bills coming up on that to determine. So what this is saying, that we'll just follow whatever, and tell me if I'm wrong, anybody, but if I'm understanding it correctly, this says it'll follow whatever code we adopt. And right now, we're under one code, so it falls under that code, and then if we stay under that code, it just continues to adopt that code if there's changes to it.
It says that we can use the 2009 UPC.
And then Alderwoman Howard was wanting to say something, so.
Um,
Oh, wait, you know what, I'm sorry. Shannon,
Was
were
there-
you done?
I'm fine, I'm just waiting.
Okay, I'm sorry.
If you look at line 5 on page 1, it says the 20 International Swimming Pool and Spa Code is published by the International Code Council. Who is that, and who are they affiliated with? And does that, I mean, I'm very confused, I
Right,
guess,
I am
because we got two different things going on here. This man's telling us that it doesn't conform with certain things. We're not plumbers, we're not pipe fitters, we don't know. And I would say, I mean, my contention is, take it back and you guys sort this out and bring us a bill that's, has better clarity.
The International Code Council is a group of code officials, people in industry, and citizens who write and promulgate codes. It was formed in roughly 2000 when when the Building Officials Code Administrators International, which was basically Midwest, the Southern Building Code Officials, which was basically Southwest, and the IAPMO, International Code Council Organization, which is basically West, came together to form one organization. And so they promulgate all the codes around the United States, Canada, Bermuda, Saudi Arabia. It's international.
But we follow the Uniform Plumbing Code, not the International
Only on the
Plumbing Code.
uniform. Everything else is under the international codes.
Just on the
Except for
plumbing.
the electrical.
And electrical is National Electrical Code. They decided they do such a good job, we're not going to touch it.
And if I may say, there is a difference between the
If you
ICC.
could use
Yeah. There is a difference between the ICC and IAPMO. The International Code Council, as the gentleman said, is mainly, the membership is building officials, plumbers, and people from the public. But when they review and they actually write like a plumbing code or a building code or a fuel gas code, only the building officials can vote to make that a code. Under IAPMO, which the Uniform Plumbing Code is under, we have the same thing. There are building officials, there's plumbers, there's manufacturers, there's engineers, and there's people from the public. When they develop a code, all of those individuals get to vote and make that a code. So there's a difference that we're using with the IAPMO, we're using everybody in the industry. With the ICCs, we're only using building officials.
Building officials being those people that inspect buildings?
Yes.
Okay.
Or
Not people in the,
inspectors.
not necessarily
Not
people
plumbers, not, yeah,
that are doing the work. I
yeah,
got
doing
you.
the work. Or engineers that are designing the work, yes.
Okay.
Did anyone else have questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would like to thank him for at least explaining this somewhat. I think it puts me in an awkward space to try to vote for something that was brought forward by, and no disrespect to the sponsor, but I guess was done by the building division, and you all can't properly convey what it is we're actually doing. Like my colleague said, we're not plumbers, we don't know. We're just here to, move a process forward. But I would like to see you all communicate more regarding it before it gets dropped in our lap, because we're making a blind decision. And I'll say this, I'm all for people being involved in the process. If going up under one umbrella only has it to where only certain people are making those decisions, and the people who are actually doing the work aren't a part of that process, I think I have a problem with that. I think that we should try to include as many people as we can to do what we need to do in that regard. So that's my take on it. I don't know what the sponsor wants to do, but I'm not comfortable voting for this.
So, what
I'm stunned and astonished and confused. Plumbers are involved. in writing this code. The building division is responsible for making sure that all trades adhere to our codes. So you're not going to get a building inspector, let's say, you know, our traditional building inspector does home occupancy permits, to go and inspect plumbing. That's not going to happen. There is no way that a code is going to be crafted without engineers in the field being part of that. So I would like you to clarify what you just said, because it just didn't make any sense.
And if you go to any of the code hearings for the International Code Council, again, there are plumbers there are engineers there, and everybody voices their opinion, but when it comes to the final vote on whether, like the 2018 International Plumbing Code, when it comes to the vote to actually adopt that as a code, it's only building officials. Sorry?
It'd be the voting members.
Which are only building, no, it's on the actual committees.
Frank, Frank, why don't you come to the, I want to make sure that we have absolute clarity on this, because at the end of the day, our building commissioner is responsible for the safety of our building structures. And we have engineers and we have mechanical professionals in this field that know what they're doing. And then we have people that do the work out in the field, contractors. We have stakeholders like the labor unions that are involved.
Jeff, could you, because the camera won't pick you up.
Are going to represent their particular interests. But at the end of the day, it's the sole responsibility on the city to make sure that we're doing things decent and in order. So this is kind of coming across as if this board bill was put together without any type of technical expertise. And maybe this council, certain plumbers didn't have a vote on it because they're not a voting member, but certainly if you get the experts in a room, you're going to listen to their recommendations. I would think that you will listen to their recommendations. We as aldermen, like Alderwoman Howard say, we're not, you know, plumbers and pipe fitters and electricians on. So we lean on the expertise of the people that we hire to give us the best guidance so that we can make laws that are in the best interest of the public. So I just want to make that clear, that because I don't want this to come across if this was some ad hoc board bill that was just done in a vacuum and that people were not consulted that have a vested interest in this bill. Go ahead.
Just want to clarify one thing. On the committee that makes a recommendation, there are plumbing contractors. Of the 15 members of the committee that makes the recommendation of whether a bill that would change a plumbing code or any other code, in this case a plumbing code, of the 15 members, at least 5 are plumbers and plumbing related. In terms of the membership voting, anybody can become a member. If we were under the International Plumbing Code, some or all of the members of our plumbing section would be members of the ICC. The city is allowed 12 voting members right now. Planning exam, the supervisors, the super supervisors are those 12 voting members. If we had, if one of the members of the plumbing section, if we were under the I code, wanted to be on a committee, we would allow them to do so. They would be eligible to do so. If they wanted to go to the hearings and vote, and they were a member, one of the 12 voting members, they would be allowed to do so. So it isn't like plumbers are being told, nope, we don't want you. No, they're there, and they're out in the audience too. If you were a inspector or a code official who is a plumber, you would be allowed to be out in the audience voting next week.
Okay, is there any other questions from the committee?
I just had a question, because Jeffrey brought up a good point about leaning towards the professionals, so that's why I think some of the reservation is coming up for some of us, because the professionals are saying that there's a problem with the bill. So is it a language thing, is it a safety thing, or is there a way that you all can come together? It's professionals being plumbers. You know what I'm saying, Jeffrey, when I say that, and I'm just speaking to your comment.
Right.
So for us looking in, it looks like, why would the plumbers and pipe fitters have a problem with it if it's something wrong. If it's not anything wrong with it, is it a safety thing or is it a language thing? I think that's what Alderwoman Howard is saying. Can we come together and make it something collectively that both parties can work with? And I really want that question answered. Is it a language thing or is it a safety thing? Why the plumbers and pipe fitters have the discrepancies with the bill?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of them, so I let him speak.
Who is this man over here?
I would say mostly it is a language. And again, the one section that was referenced earlier in Chapter 11, where the wording from the IAPMO codes were being put in with the 2009 Uniform Plumbing Code. I know it keeps saying that we're going to be adopting whatever plumbing code is adopted by the city, but yet, if you look at the wording, it's very specific, where it says IAPMO UPC 2009 Uniform Plumbing Code. To me, in a bill, if it's adopted or becomes law, it's the 2009 Uniform Plumbing Code. And those sections are referenced to the 2009 Plumbing Code. They're not referenced to this board bill. If you read that section, they're referenced to the plumbing, to the Uniform Plumbing Code. So I think there's some discrepancies on the way things are worded, yes.
Alderman John Mohammed, I apologize for.
No, it's fine. No, you're fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner, just a quick question. You mentioned you were going to, are you a Deputy Commissioner?
No, I'm just a senior plan reviewer.
Sure, it's the same thing. We can go with that. Deputy Commissioner,
Peon third class, actually.
you mentioned you were going to Las Vegas for a conference?
Yes, ICC is having their annual conference next week where they will do, as part of, well, actually for the next 2 weeks, they will be voting on various sections of the building code, residential code, energy code, and maybe more. Those are just the ones I remember.
Now, the codes that the ICC adopt, those are really just suggestions for
just suggestions
governmental
until
bodies
the-
to adopt.
They're just suggestions until the municipality adopt them, then they become law.
But
That's why
only if various governmental bodies pass ordinance adopting those
Well, that's what we do. And then
suggestions.
in this case, we're changing Chapter 1. It's a lot easier to throw out their Chapter 1, write our own Chapter 1. Then there's changes beyond that, which are the ones that he's talking about, where I changed, where it said International Plumbing Code, so I took the word out of international to say Plumbing Code, and then because the I code is listed in the reference standards, I added the Uniform Plumbing Code. The numbers he's so worried about were the numbers where plumbing code is referenced in the book. So it was necessary to take the word international out so that we left it plumbing code. The numbers there do not refer to the plumbing code, the international or the Uniform Plumbing Code. They refer to the section of the book, this book, which references a plumbing code and had the word international in front of it. So we cleaned that up, to clean that out. Did that help, sir?
No,
Okay, good.
no. I mean, I barely understand the basis of the bill. I'm not comfortable voting on this bill. I would ask the committee to hold it for further consideration. I don't know much about it, speaking a third language to me. So I'm just not comfortable voting on something that I'm not familiar with.
And can I make a suggestion? Why don't we just not reference IAP or UPC and just say the city code? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. You're referencing two different things, and it becomes very confusing. And then
Well,
the way this is here, the way it appears,
well,
looks
ma'am, if we don't
janky.
put the IAPMO code in the book, you can't use it to do anything to this code, with this book. You have to have both of them in. You know, if it'd make them happy, I'll take the I code out. I don't care. But that wouldn't work. That's why it's a generic plumbing code.
I agree with Alderman Mohammed that this is confusing, and that if you could get with other people and get this cleaned up, I'd be more than happy to.
Well, I don't know really what you need to do to clean it up.
So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to hold this.
Wait a minute.
Okay. until-
Okay.
well, just till next week.
So,
And I would ask that
I'm out
you
of
guys,
town next week, so
I don't have a problem holding the bill, okay? If there's language that's ambiguous, it need to be cleared up. We can work on clearing it up. If, like he said, if the language is the language, and it's gonna be even more confusion if you remove it, or you cite something that bounces you right back around and it becomes this circular issue, then that's not gonna be productive. I wanna say this bill was filed in July. So anybody had an issue with this bill had over 2 months to talk to me about the issues with the bill. There was attempts to get with me by one of the representatives, but it just never happened. But at the end of the day, this was an open, transparent process. We as aldermen, again, are not the technical experts in the field of anything that has to do with the building division. 'Cause I don't know any one of us that's an engineer or that's even worked in the building division. And we can have anybody come before us and give their opinion, their technical expertise, experience, opinion about anything that we do. But at the end of the day, we have a building commissioner, and we have engineers, and we have mechanical experts that work on behalf of the city of St. Louis. It's their job and responsibility, and we pay them to give us the right information. So I will hope we don't set a precedence that if somebody comes that has a particular issue or bias or want certain things their way, that we start holding up legislations because they've confused us. That's not going to be a smart way of doing business. But because I feel like I'm a very fair person, and I always like to be transparent, I'm willing to hold the bill.
I would just say, we're going to come back. Mr. Brendel, when do you come back?
I'll be back in 2 weeks.
Why don't we hear this win, lose, draw in 2 weeks?
And that's certainly fine.
And we're
It's
going to
that
vote on it.
I'm annoyed
No.
right now about some of the conversation, as if no one knew who to reach out to and have these conversations before today, because that's not right and that's not fair. And then having this language of confusion to the point where the committee, don't know which end is up, that's not fair. But
That's right.
we can hold it for 2 weeks, we can hold it for 3 weeks. At the end of the day, the commitment is give them a seat at the table, listen to their concerns, and make a decision and put it before the committee.
And that's what we're
And we're
doing
gonna
I
today.
think that's all we're asking.
2 weeks
That's
from
what
now,
we're
we're
doing.
going to come back, and we're going to vote this one way or the other.
I'm good with that.
Thank you
But I
so
just want
much.
to make sure that you understood my concern.
No, I do. And Jeff, you got to take over, because me and John's bills are the next ones
Okay.
coming up. So we'll see you guys in a couple weeks. There'll be a note, we'll send a notice and all that.
Thank you.
I don't think anybody was saying anything about
No, that
being
was rude.
transparent.
These are ones that the chief, I think the chief wants to speak on the bill. These are ones, so, and I did tell the chief that he could speak on. So, John, you got to introduce your bill first.
Mr. Chairman, which board bill do you want to hear next?
Got John's name on both. The next two's got mine and John.
Okay.
One of them's more.
Which one did the chief want to speak on? Is he speaking on both of them? Okay. Okay.
Not one reduction, but adding
No, he can speak on that too if he wants.
war reduction. No, but, so the two they want to speak on are the
You mean the,
district
right, okay, so that would be,
surveillance.
It's Board Bill 107, we on Board Bill 94, Mr. Chairman.
you want to do 107 first?
I can, I thought we was doing Board Bill 94 first, but it's up
It's
to you.
your pleasure. I'm yielding to your will and pleasure, Alderman. Which one would you like to hear?
It's up to you, you call it, sir.
And I'm here because I'm on with John.
What's, the board bill before the committee right now is Board Bill 107, sponsored by Alderman John Collins Muhammad. Alderman,
Yes.
You are on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Does everyone have a copy of Board Bill 107 in front of them? Well, I hope so. I'm going to assume so. Board Bill 107 is simple. It directs the police commissioner and the Division of Police to establish non-police districts throughout the city of St. Louis. Prior to 2014, we had non-police districts. Then Police Commissioner Sam Dotson changed it to 6. And I think since then, we all can see that 6 districts is not working in our favor or as it relates to crime reduction in the city of St. Louis. I think we need to spread out resources, and I think establishing non-police districts can do that. When we had non-police districts, the districts was of course, much more smaller, much more intimate. Officers knew everyone in that community. They knew the aldermen. They knew community leaders, and it was far better in regards to police response time. You know, if I'm in my community right now and I call the police to come to College Hill, but the police is all the way in Greaterville, it's going to take them 10 minutes to get to the incident that's taking place in my ward. So what this would do is improve police response time. It will increase police presence in inner neighborhoods where we see the most crime, neighborhoods that we all represent, north and south. And it will create a better working relationship with the police department, its district officers, and the leaders in those wards or communities. It's a very simple bill. This does not add more money to the police budget. It just forces the Division of Police to figure out how to equal out across these 9 districts. And again, we had 9 districts prior to 2014. And I'd like to see us go back to 9. Of course, 3 what's the word? Central, 3 stations, central.
Substations.
All right, 3 substations, Central Patrol, South Patrol, and North Patrol. Each substation or each division would see 3 districts within those stations, instead of 2, currently what we have now.
Sharon, did you feel this okay?
Okay.
And also, I also want to say this. I know that in the past there has been a conversation about the police department being top-heavy, meaning too many white shirts, too many people who sit in offices and really don't have any jurisdiction over any command bureaus within the police department. So establishing non-police districts, giving us 3 more police districts. Of course, you would have to appoint 3 more captains and appoint 12 more sergeants and 36 more lieutenants or so on and so on. So that does play a part in this board bill. But I think that if we can actually organize the police department to where we are not just promoting people, giving them a white shirt, giving them a gold badge, but actually sending them out into the community to where crime is taking place, then that should not be an issue or a factor with this board bill. Again, I'm just trying to improve police and community relations, and we can do that with this board bill. If the members of the community have questions, I can answer, or if anybody wants to come up and speak, they are welcome to.
I'm going to take the chief. If there's anybody else that want to speak, I want to give you a chance. I will put the sign-up sheet back at the front, but right now we only have the chief sign in to speak. Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee, to have an opportunity to speak with you. So right now, currently, we are in the middle of an implementation of a new report writing system, a records management system, which is quite demanding on our IT section. The data analysis, which goes into the calculations surrounding redistricting, is very cumbersome. We want to get this right this time, and so I'm asking that you give us 6 months before we even start doing the analytical work surrounding the redistricting issue. Instead of 6 months to get it back to 9. I think the bill asks for 6 months to implement it. And so we need really 6 months before we can take a hard look at it, because we're right in the middle of a record management system transfer. The other thing is contextually, just for context. So when the discussion around redistricting came up some 5 years ago, the issue was that 2 districts were not being operated as efficiently as possible. Both had lower costs for service and both had lower number of officers. That would be districts, then Districts 5 and District 8. I was the commander of District 8 at the time. Ideally, those districts would have been absorbed into other districts. Instead, Chief Dotson did an analysis of the number of calls for service and divided the city into 6 pieces of a pie and distributed the officers evenly across those districts without any consideration about the types of calls for service. That was a mistake. Prior to that, we had never had all districts with the same number of officers due to the districts with different demands. Under this current configuration, we have 1/3 of our officers handling 2/3 of the city's violent crime. So again, I'm asking for more time, 6 months to be exact, before we take a hard forensic look at calls for service and the best deployment of manpower. And additionally, I think the Alderman already mentioned that. Additionally, we would have to promote more captains, more lieutenants, and more supervisors, which would have a significant fiscal impact if we did so immediately.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Chairman, Vaccaro, first to ask questions.
Chief, I have questions for the chief.
Chief?
You know, so, a couple things that really bother me, and I'm not ambushing or doing anything, but we were sold that, gee, you know, city control the police, we're going to save all this money, it costs us more money. We were told that by going to the 6 districts, we were going to have less, you know, we actually put more positions back. There's more captains now, and I know because I'll go get the books out of the other room. 1/3, right now, you're allowed to have 1,340 police officers. You have roughly around 1,000 or something like that. Out of that, you have 300 and a little over 300 are sergeants and above. So roughly a quarter or more of our department is white shirts. How many captains do we have right now?
We have 8 captains right now, I believe, off the top of my head.
So we would only have to get 1 captain back then, not 3.
Well, you would have to, in order to have the districts, I mean, those captains are doing something in bureaus that they always did in the past. So, for example, the homicide captain. So that's always had a captain there in crimes against persons. So we would have to promote 3 more captains at a minimum in order to do this, if we went back to 9.
Okay, and I'll go back and look at the numbers. Again, when I was looking at this, roughly a quarter of the officers on the street are in white shirts. A little over 300 out of roughly 1,000 officers that we have on the street right now. Now, I'm not talking about the 1,300 we should have.
Yeah, I'd want to look at that closely. I do not believe we have more commanders than we had when we had 9 districts currently. So I think that is a misdiagnosis. I'd have to double check.
What I'm asking, and I can go look. In fact, I can actually go look now and come back. But I just know when I was looking at the things the other day, you know, one of the complaints the association makes is that we're way top heavy. And when I look at those numbers, it sort of looks like we're way top heavy when again, you know, and what I can do is I can send you something rather than debate it here, so that this way you're not prepared, because my books are in the other room.
Right.
But I can send you something and we can come back and both be on the same page.
That is fine.
Okay? So that was really where I'm at on it. Thank you.
Okay, Alderwoman Howard.
Thank you for coming today.
Yes.
So you're saying you're going to a new reporting system?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
Can you expand on that?
So right now, our reporting system is called iLeads. It's about it's at least a 12 or 13-year-old programming report writing system that's really not as up to speed technologically as it should be. And so last year we were given the budget to actually implement the new reporting records management system. Is more consistent with some of the uniform crime reporting that the FBI requires. Okay. And so we're in the middle of implementing that. And so what I'm saying is that it is to go to the data analysis that would be required to really take a honest forensic look at our deployment of resources currently would be very cumbersome to our IT section. So our IT section is responsible for implementing the records management system.
So what you're saying, drawing the data for extracting data to give you a up-to-the-minute information on how to best deploy
That's
into
correct.
9 districts would be
Yeah,
almost next to, it would be a big distraction.
It would be a very big distraction right in the middle of the program. But when I talked to one of the IT directors, they mentioned that if we could have 6 months before we took the hard look that the board is asking for, would be very helpful to
So
our
if we gave you 6 months to finish implementing this, you could have better data to begin.
Yes, ma'am.
Examining.
6 months to finish implementing the records management system, then we could take a real strong look at redistricting as an issue.
And I guess going along with Alderman Vaquero's, I do feel as though maybe we are a little top-heavy, and it might be because the white shirts stand out a little more than the blue shirts. I don't know. But I would like to have the data on what our force looks like and the breakdown of, I guess, those in
Rank,
charge
absolutely.
versus
Yes,
the
ma'am.
rank and file. But I understand what you're saying, because right now we need as many boots on the ground as we can
That is
muster to deal with the problems we are having in the city. And if breaking it into nine districts helps that, that's fine. But in the meantime, I don't want to take people off the street to try to implement something where we need people on the street every
Yes, ma'am,
day.
especially when, like I said, for the first time, did not take into any consideration the types of calls for service. So basically, what they did was count the call for service, tried to put that evenly across what would be some type of, some kind of geographic division
Right.
of the city. And it just was short-sighted.
Inconsiderate,
It was
yeah.
short-sighted not to consider the types of calls for service.
I agree, and I think that, we have, and it goes, it's cyclical, and it can change at any time.
Right.
Very fluid, so
And I want us to have the opportunity to fix it right,
I
to
appreciate
get it right
that.
the next time, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for coming today.
You finished, Alderwoman Hubbard?
I am.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, I just have a quick question of the chief.
Chief, you might as well stay.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
So explain this to me. You said it takes 6 months to compile the data to see where the need is, or what's the 6 months?
So the 6 months that I'm referring to is I know that the bill called for the implementation back to 9 districts within 6 months. I want 6 months before I look at what would be the best configuration. For example, it could be very well that we determine that 7 districts is better than 9 districts, but I want the data to prove that. But I'm saying, but that was certainly, clearly when we first even started having a conversation about redistricting, the issue was that there were 2 districts that were not being efficiently operated. One was District 8, I was the commander of that one, and the other one was District 5. And so what could have happened that I think we would all probably be much more used to what we were accustomed to prior to that would have just been to absorb those districts into another district. But instead, Chief Dotson did a count for calls of service. So it was an accurate count for calls of service, no consideration about types of call for service. In other words, treating an assault first or a robbery the same as you would a burglary or something else. And so that not adding that piece as a part of the consideration, I think that we've all determined was short-sighted in this original implementation.
Absolutely, and that system definitely did a disservice to my neighborhood and to others, because I just don't see it having to take us this long to try to figure out what the best practice would be to try to rectify this situation. I mean, if everything is data-driven, like every month we get a printout of calls for service and what those calls are, I hope that as a city, our record keeping or technology is not that antiquated
Yes,
to where
ma'am.
we can't get current data to see
Yes, ma'am.
what's what.
It wouldn't take 6 months to determine how the district should be separated. What I'm saying is that we have another project that's a priority right now that we're in the middle of, and if we could just get the time
Right.
to get much further along to that, we can certainly put the dedicated time to look at how should the manpower be deployed in a better way and more efficient. Yes.
Okay, and thank you for saying that, but to my constituents, a priority is definitely just getting an officer there. I myself, even in my capacity, and I've called, because I don't call private, I give my name and all of that, I've called several times when stuff has been going on in my community, and I'm right down the street. I'm like literally 2 minutes away from Central Patrol, and it takes forever for an officer to get there. So when my constituents call me and they have concerns about police response time, that's an issue. I am definitely in support of police, have supported Prop P and everything. My ward was probably one of the few wards in North St. Louis that passed in, because we definitely support our police officers. But we have a problem when you have people having to come all the way across town to service an area, or if you have officers, without due respect to them, but you have officers literally hanging out and, you know, not addressing some of these calls. And then when you don't look at things intricate enough to realize that we don't need the same overlay on the hill that we may need in North St. Louis. So I was here when Dotson made that decision. It was a bad decision. It did not help anyone. And so we need to do something, and I think we need to do something right away, because the current district setup is not working at all. And I mean, my constituents don't care if it's 9 or 20 districts. They just want the police presence. They want the police to be there when they call, and I think that we need to take some hard looks into what's really going on within our police department. I mean, it's sitting on Ways and Means. We see where the fat is. We look through that budget book in detail. We know where the money is being spent. We know a lot of it is being spent on overtime. We know all of these things, and so I think we have to be open and transparent about what we're doing as a city. If we have all these white shirts, I mean, some of those white shirts probably need to be on the ground if we're short 100 or 200 officers, and I think that's what we have to get towards. So, you know, everybody has to take a cut sometime to make sure things work, and I definitely support this bill, and I think we need to move forward with this bill, because we know for sure that what we are currently doing is not working, and our crime is through the roof, and we need police in our community every step of the way for 1,000,001 reasons. So I do respect the fact that you are not resistant to it. You're just asking for some time, but I think we definitely need to take a step in the right direction and know that what we currently have is not working.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's all my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Alderwoman Pam Boyd.
No.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
No question.
Okay. Chief, let's back up just a little bit. You're saying you're going through something with your data system?
Yes, we are implementing a new report writing system. So the baseline to write police reports right now, that system currently is called iLeads, and it's approximately 10 or 12 years old.
Okay.
And so the information that we need to share with the FBI on crime data sharing will be much more improved and much more sharing across other departments when we update it. And so it's in the middle of the implementation process. So we're not finished with it yet. And so what I'm just asking for is more time before we put this additional burden on our IT section.
How long will it take?
Well, 6 months will be very helpful. So I asked the IT director, when will because it still won't be finished, but when will the load on the records management system be lightened? And they said 6 months would be very helpful.
Okay. Let me ask you this. If you just took the current data that you have, notwithstanding, getting this, better, more efficient system, can you use that data to start looking at how you can increase to 9 districts?
You certainly could start looking. I guess the key is that what you want to do, though, is be very forensic about that decision making. I mean, if you're going to take a cursory look, then you'll likely get a cursory result, which will not address some of the things that the alderpersons are bringing up about their need for response time, that kind of thing. So I'm not going to say it was quickly done last time. I just think that it was a very, very big consideration with respect to types of call for service was not a part of that data analysis. So excellent job of just slicing the city based on call for service. However, it is, being one of the commanders of North Patrol Division, hey, if people in different parts of the city are going on burglary and our officers are going on shootings and robberies, which take a whole lot more time, I think that had to be a part of the equation. It was not.
Okay, this new system, what is it going to give you that the current system cannot give you?
Just how about the ability to report more rapidly, the ability to share more information with our federal partners. So it's an updated system. Any technology that's 12 years old is antiquated, and it's not as flexible when you want to report information. When persons ask for information from whether it be the media or whether it be an older person about quickly giving some information, some data that's contained inside of the current system, a lot more cumbersome. And so as we would suspect with any 12-year-old software, very, very slow moving.
Slow, okay. And who in the IT department are you working with?
Sherry Schaefer is the person that I consulted with. Deli, of course, is the director, but the person that is implementing the records management system is Sherry Schaefer, the assistant director of our IT section.
So is she part of the city's IT section? Or I know the police department used to have its own.
Yes.
And then the city had its own.
Part of the St. Louis Police Department's IT section.
Okay. Stay right there, but I'm going to ask Robert Gasco if he would come up. He didn't sign in to speak, but he's our IT professional. Since you're here, there's obviously a reason for you attending this hearing. Oh, because yes, right, you're an expert in technology. So you're not playing any role in this new system upgrade at all?
I am not. This system falls underneath the purview of police IT. It's an internal system, whereas my focus as the Chief Technology Officer is on external public-facing systems. So this, just like a enterprise resource planning system or whatever, it's specifically aimed at operations inside the police department. So it does not fall on my plate.
Okay, thank you. Chief, again, I know the system is slow because I'm trying to be sensitive to this 6-month request, but also sensitive to the sense of urgency that our constituents need better response times now. So tell me again, the current system that you have, how long would it take for you to get the data that you need on the current response times across the whole city within each district, or however you need to analyze this data? How long is that going to take?
I'm going to say that takes three.
Take 6 months.
No, that will not take 6 months, but it'll take probably a good 3 months. Yeah, that won't take 6 months, but how about this? It took probably 6 months last time. So I'm just saying, without having been the person that spearheaded it last time, I know that it was very, very labor intensive.
So is it labor intensive because they're taking information out of this and data entering it somewhere else, or are we able to just import and export?
I think a lot of the time was spent studying what would be the best route to take. So in other words, you get the data, you do the calls for service, and so again, when I'm asking for is time to study the issue properly. A lot of people are disappointed with the results, and so I'm saying to get it right, you can't just simply do a data dump and come up with the right analysis. Like I say again, a big factor was not considering types of call for service, and I think that having been there when that happened, I think that one of the recommendations that I made after a year that we've had it was the fact that it's just lopsided with what we're trying to do citywide. So I just want to get it right. If we're gonna do it, I want to get it right, and we need some time.
And I certainly appreciate that because we definitely want to get it right. But let me go back and make sure I'm clear. So if you did a data dump today, you need 3 months to analyze that data.
That's what, if I did it today, I would say a minimum of 3 months to analyze it.
Okay.
Right. So all I'm saying is that we can push the envelope on the time. Like I said, I think one of the persons that are a part of my staff was here when Chief Dotson did it. But I think my point is that it was 6 months in the making, data analysis, the first time. So let's just say that I am pushing the completion of the project once we start. I'm just asking for delay the start time. That's what I'm asking for, a delay in the start time so that we can do it right.
Well, let me ask you about staffing up for it. We're down
130 some odd officers.
130
Yes, sir.
officers. So if we went back to 9 districts, do we have enough officers, white shirts, blue shirts, sergeants, police officers, to staff up to 9 districts?
No.
So how will we manage that then?
Well, that's
once you do your analysis.
presuming that we would recommend that we would go to 9 districts. I mentioned, I think the key is that what addressing the problem from 5 years ago would have merely been, that was, like I said, this without any analysis whatsoever.
Okay.
So the problem 5 years ago was that 2 districts weren't being operated efficiently as possible. So I don't know how that analysis would look if we looked at it harder now. What would that data say? We didn't have, so we were still, I was talking to Scott, so we were still probably 120 something officers short, even when we implemented the first time. So it's not like it's going to be some big number like, you had 130 officers more when we went down to 6. That's not true. But what I am telling you is that the analysis, if you want to get it right, you have to look at it from a crime analysis point of view, a very forensic look at calls for service and types of calls for service, historic trends for calls for service, and then basically cut your pie based on that. It may not be, it could very well be that a better configuration is 7 districts as opposed to 9. But I don't want to talk just in conjecture speculatively about something that's very important. And so we need to look at it real hard and then make some recommendations about what we can do to be more efficient to our city.
Can I ask one more question?
Okay. Sure, Alderwoman Howard.
I guess, the intent of this is to get boots on the ground. And I don't care where you live in the city of St. Louis, there is a delay in service. It takes forever, and I don't care what the crime is, it's difficult. I mean, we've had people assaulted in my neighborhood. It's bad. And I don't know what the problem is. I know we're down officers, but, how many officers do we have on the street at any given time? Do you have any statistics on that?
At any given time, you would have, let's see, you got, each district has 9 beats. So at any given time, you have 54 officers throughout the city, presuming that they're one-man cars. Potentially, if some of them are two-man cars, you may have 70-some-odd officers.
And not being in law enforcement, what is the recommendation?
About?
From CALEA or any other international organizations on, I'm coming from the educational standpoint, pupil-teacher ratio.
Sure.
Those types of things.
So
I'm sure there are standards and recommendations.
I would tell you this also, that our ratios, as well as our response times on priority 1 calls, are consistent with national standards. Priority 1 calls. Now calls that aren't priority 1, that would not be the same. But for calls, emergency calls, a lot of the violent crime, code 1, shootings, that kind of thing, our response time is consistent with national standards.
But I mean, as far as numbers of police, are there, I'm sure there, as I said, there's probably recommendations by population and so forth and types of crimes.
Right.
Are we?
So at the time this first dissemination of officers was done, I would say that it was consistent with national standards. But again, I'd have to look at it to say how far off are we now, or even over, how consistent are we with national standards based on the current configuration of officers. And that's what I agree with you all, that we need to study, but I'm just asking for time to study it.
And I don't know, how can we get minimize response on priority 1 and 2 calls and have more patrols out there looking and actively, initiating.
Yes, ma'am. And that
Initiating crime.
That is an additional challenge with being 130 some officers short. I mean, imagine having 23 or so more officers per district. I mean, that would minimize a lot of the concerns that we have.
Because I understand, Alderman Collins, is as all of us are trying to address the situation in the city. I mean, crime is rampant, and you know, we're behind you, but we need some indication that something's changing and that we're getting, you know, some help from the police. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take some questions from some of our colleagues, and Alderwoman Tyus is going to be the next person up, but she also wants to make public comment. But before she makes public comment, I'm going to go to her, and then Alderwoman Annie Rice from the 8th Ward before she comes up to make public comment. So Alderwoman Tyus.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I've been very silent because I've been silenced by the fact that the chief comes from my ward and the public safety director comes from my ward, because by now you would have been in here, you would have heard me. When you say, you know, I used to be the chair of the public employees. When you say that we are down, how many police officers? 130 police officers?
Yes, ma'am. 100. I think it's 134 to be exact.
Now, does that number include the officers on probation?
That includes all current employees. So you're saying probation
Yes,
for.
because don't you have probationary officers?
Yes, so that would include officers that are out of the academy. It wouldn't include persons that's in the academy. So people that are actually commissioned police officers working the streets, that would include that number.
I have information from a very reliable source that it's not a good number, and they brought that proof to me as the chair of the public employees, that number, in fact, when the mayor talked about the number and the director of personnel had very different numbers.
That is correct. No, they do have very different numbers, but they are counting in a different way. So all I'm saying is,
how do you count people in a different way?
They're counting persons that are in the academy as persons that are filled positions. So I know that for a fact. And I don't. So you got to get through the academy. The academy is 6 months long. So we do not count them in the officer count. So that's separate. We have a separate account for people in the academy versus one. So when I say that there are 130 officers, 130 some odd officers short, that's actual police officers that should be on the street, not the ones that are in the academy.
So when they're in the academy, do they do any police officer work at all?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So you're saying that the personnel director, not the mayor, counts those in the academy?
The difference between the count that the personnel director would do and the one that we do, they would include filled positions as persons that are, you know, filling to become officers versus ours would separate those numbers out. So we have a separate category of persons that are people in the academy versus people that are actually have graduated from the academy.
And so do you have any police officers that are on probation? Are you on probation for a certain amount of time before you are assured a position?
Yes, ma'am. So you're on probation a year. After you get out of the academy, you're on probation for a year, but you're a fully fledged commissioned officer.
So as the chair of public employees, you know, I get a list of every employee and with a classification that when I used to be the chair. So I want to say that I respectfully disagree with your number. That's all I'm going to say right now, and I would like to sit down with you to talk about that number, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
So just moving on, I have served under 8 police chiefs, from Sheets all the way to you, okay? So I've served with a lot of police chiefs. You said that, and I told you this already, every time I drive through Euclid, down through the Central West End, there's a 5th District SUV always there. I'm on the edge of the 5th District now. I used to be in the middle of the 8th District. We had pretty good police, and in fact, I had a police captain / major named Hayden that was really good in my community. I liked him, okay? So I'm not happy with what I have now. We changed under Dotson maybe 5 years ago or so, 6 years ago?
Yes.
14?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, 2014 is when we took over, 2015. Yeah, 2014 is when we switched. Yes.
And you yourself have said that that's not working.
I agree that that was not the best implementation of deployment of resources.
Okay, and how do you know that? Why do you think that?
I say that because I know that, you know, when people explain how I came up with a strategy for how we would fight violent crime, that I knew that 67% of the violent crime happened in 1/3 of the districts.
So if we have 67% of the violent crime one place, but yet we made everybody have equal police, that was not going to be a good fit.
I do not believe that was a good idea.
And in fact, I sat down at the other end of that table when Dotson announced that. Alderman then was Antonio French, and we argued with him at length about how that was a horrible idea and should not be based on calls, because a lot of times African Americans don't make calls. That doesn't mean that crime's not going on. They just don't make calls. So you've been knowing, that. How long have you been the commissioner now?
I've been for almost 2 years.
Okay, so to me, 2 years has been a long time for us to know that that was not a good process for us not to have changed it, okay? Some kind of change, and for once, let's just look at the 6th district. If we didn't change everything, to me, I was waiting for you to come right in and change the 6th district because it's horrible. It's way too large, and while I was here, when Mokwa, I think, was the chief, they divided the 4th. Was it the 4th, or it was, that they divided into two district, 4, sub 1 and sub 2 or something like that? Was it the 4th?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But it's over in South St. Louis, down over in Tower Grove area and whatever, it was the 3rd, one of those, yeah, the 3rd, okay, that they divided that, and it wasn't nearly as large as the 6th district was. And so I'm disappointed that 2 years later, we haven't done anything. You're talking about doing the numbers, but my question is, what about the fact that we know this is a bad system, and we've already given you 2 years, which I think is very tolerable, okay? So when you tell me about messing up your accounting procedures, I'm talking about the lives and good policing in my community. That's why I'm not going to support not one extra day for me. To me, it needs to be done, that 2 years is enough. Not being unfair to you, you know I love you, but 2 years is enough time, that something should have been changed by now. And I don't think it should have been that the Board of Aldermen had to put a board bill in for that to happen, okay? And I'm just telling you that, okay? Have you had any discussions with anyone about making changes to the districts?
Yes, so the Director of Public Safety and I had talked about it on a couple of different occasions, but again, the opportune time to start working on it had not come inside of those 2 years. And so 2 years is a long time, but I would have had to prioritize that and make that a priority.
When you tell me, Chief, Commissioner, that you know that we have the officers unfairly stacked in a district, then hear what you're saying, okay? Hear what you're telling me and the rest of the aldermen. Right. You're saying, I've known this, I've been the commissioner/chief for 2 years, and that was not a priority. In the meantime, we are dying on the vine, okay? We're not getting, so I don't care if you didn't change the districts, then you ought to change the manpower. Right. Something should have been changed.
So the challenge to changing all that midway
I appreciate that you wanted to answer me, but I did not give you the floor. I was still talking.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, okay? So the change should have been done some other kind of way. Then if you weren't going to do the districts, then I should have heard something saying, look, this was not a good way to do it. So based on some kind of cause, which you already quoted to me yourself, then I'm going to move some of the manpower over to some of the districts that need it. Okay, now you can have the floor.
Yes, ma'am. So to compensate for what I'm calling an inordinate process, what I did do is I implemented the rectangle in the North Patrol Division. And so what we did is that, and I promised all the alderpersons when I first met with them that I was not going to take officers out of their districts and put them in one place. But what I was going to do is utilize our supplemental resources in places where the most violent crime has happened. So that's what I've been doing in the interim. But again, it really would require a redo of the process.
So just saying, speaking from what used to be the 20th Ward, it's now called the 1st Ward, we did not, so I'm in that, but I have had to fight with every police chief since Sheets to say every North St. Louis ward's murder is not the #1 thing. We were able to keep murders down and keep my community because we enforce smaller codes that you enforce in other places. So I would often have to call the chiefs and tell them the law, because when I would call the police about things, they would say, oh, no. And then I would fax over then, because we didn't have email, over to your predecessors. Here's the law. And yes, you are supposed to enforce these. So if you only enforcing, my frustration is I talk to the people in my community every week and day. And I'm frustrated because you're enforcing murders, but they're calling about trash being dumped. They're calling about people working on cars illegally. They're calling about all these other things that make them be middle and working class African-American people who get up and say, I'm out of here. Peace out, okay? So I don't want it to get to murders for us to get policing. I have the worst I've lived in my house for 32 years. I want to tell you, I feel unpoliced. I have the worst policing under this current 5th district because we're on the edge of the Central West End and we do not exist. And I told you this, and I told you there's a South St. Louis alderman. Every time we go down the street at Culpeppers, there the 5th district is. So how does that happen? But when we call the police, when I call the police, when my constituents call the police, not about murders, I know we're not priority ones, but part of community policing is not wanting to get to the murders, it's preventative to keep it from getting to that. So what do we get if your priority is always just on that triangle of murder?
Well, Alderman, when I became chief, I think what my goal was is to get St. Louis out of that conversation of being one of the most violent cities. And I don't know how you do that without focusing on violent crime, the robberies, the robberies, the assault first with firearms, the homicides. And so again, what I did to try to try to adjust to the fact that we had a system of deployment that wasn't ideal. What I tried to do is had most of the officers in that one area, and so I've called it the rectangle, but we did see an 18% reduction in violent crime my first year. So I'm saying I think I had the right idea, but now some of the other issues are coming up, and I just want an opportunity to look at it very closely so we can get it right for our citizens.
And I understand what you're saying, but that's what happens in schools and all over the place. So the kids that are doing what they're supposed to, when I was growing up, my teachers used to send us to the library because we were the kids that didn't get in trouble. We got good grades. So we went to the library because you had to deal with the kids that were acting up in school, okay? So I'm saying that has been my argument that it's not a good way to police because other people who are not doing such crimes, but they're irritating people and making them want to leave. So if you make the people who hardly need but anything, and we just had this discussion over in the leisure room, triage, you can't just always deal with the murders. If you don't deal with the other smaller items, they become larger items and larger items. And then that becomes maybe two neighbors that can't stand each other anymore, and it becomes violent. So always before I've been able to get a little bit of policing that was just my little working middle class issues. But this is very important to people where I live, okay? And you grew up not too far, and so you know how they are. So when they're not getting that policing, I'm getting they're very frustrated because they know where you come from and they know where the public safety director lives,
Yes,
okay? So how do we now get some focus on the smaller crimes that I've been hearing about from when Clarence Harmon became the first black police chief about community policing? What happened to that?
Well, hey, you certainly raised some very legitimate issues, and all I can tell you is that my plan is to have way more accountability with respect to the captains of the district. If you talked about some concerns that you had about how your district is being policed, there have been times when you said that you were very pleased with it, and so that's something we can address. We can certainly address that.
I like when you were policing me, but now you the captain. I mean, you the big dog, so I can't have that personal. But
I think we can get back to that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I do want to testify.
You're welcome. Alderwoman Rice.
Thank you so much, Chief. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
Good. So I had a question about the shortage on officers at the moment. Been advised kind of similarly that we have a lot of personnel in the police department. What about backfilling in these positions? What about moving some of the people who are currently in other jobs at desk offices, that kind of thing, back out onto the streets, get them back in patrol cars, get them out there responding? Can we be doing some of these task force jobs from the cars? Where is the highway patrol relieving services that we can get more officers back out on the street?
Sure. So when the highway patrol, I think today is their first day. So when they at any given time, I understand there could be from maybe 8 to 12 officers out there at any given time. They will be doing rotating. They're not telegraphing their locations. But anytime that is in place, we will not have those officers on the highways. And so our traffic safety division won't be on the highways when the highway patrol is out there, but we will have their schedule.
Okay, but so that's only traffic safety then,
That's correct.
Right? And I don't know that I've ever seen anything other than commercial vehicle enforcement out on our highways period, ever have a stop of anyone out on the highways, but that's my limited experience.
Yeah,
as
no,
far as-
our traffic safety division does an excellent, does
Okay,
a very.
well, sure, I'm not
Sure.
saying they do a bad job, I'm just saying I don't see a ton of them out there, and so are those resources then going back towards just traffic enforcement on our local streets? Is that where
Absolutely,
they're-
that was my, without having benefit of talking to our colonel over that, but I'm saying certainly my idea, because the alderpersons oftentimes bring up traffic safety inside, and there are other state roads, even within the city, you know, like Natural Bridge is one of them. We've clocked people going 105 on Natural Bridge. So my idea was to have greater enforcement off the highways during that time period.
Okay, are those officers also available to respond to calls as needed when, when a call comes in? Are they purely set aside for traffic enforcement, or are they also back up on other calls?
Primary traffic enforcement, but certainly they could be diverted to do something if necessary.
Okay. So as far as backfilling into some of these positions, is that a possibility?
Well, like I said, limited possibility, and so that there's some ability to backfill some positions. Like I said, the other ones were task force, and so we already have officers on the task forces.
Right.
The highway patrol didn't have persons on the task forces, and
Okay.
so I really won't be able to take those officers off the task force. We do have representation on all the federal agencies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess we're just trying to, everybody's trying to think strategically about, this is the number of officers that we have right now. And so how do we best staff our needs with the officers that we currently have, right? And whether that's, moving people back into cars that haven't been in cars in a while, or, shifting resources around, how do we change the system? If every department in the country is having a hard time getting staff right now, then how do we evolve to make this smarter and work better for the city too? Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to a public comment. Thank you, Chief.
Okay.
First up is Justin Eidelberg.
Okay. In regards to this bill, will it be any more community policing? Because I remember when we had the 7th District Police, they used to be a little more active. Oh, I'm sorry. If we go back to 9, will we have more community engagement? And also, we got these nice cameras up. How will all this intertwine to make our neighborhoods better as a whole? And I don't know if that's a question for you all or the chief who just left.
Well, during the public comment, you just get a chance to make your comment. There's not
Okay.
always a call and response. So, is that your comment?
Yes.
Okay, and it will be our hope that once the chief does his forensic analysis, that we will be open to hearing all those aspects of it.
Okay. Do you all know if there have been any monies allocated towards this? No more new monies?
They have enough.
You said they have
I
enough?
don't
All right.
see why.
I thank y'all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eidelberg. Next up is Alderwoman Sharon Tyus for public comment, and then we'll go back to the Alderman to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked to speak in the public comment because I was actually here in 1991 when they decided to do the big superstations. Okay, the Board of Aldermen almost unanimously was opposed to that and said that this was not a good idea. We couldn't do anything about it because the police reported to the state, and they thought that was a great idea. So as soon as Clarence Harmon became the first black police chief, I met with the then mayor, Vince Shamel, then they did it anyway. And we were not happy with it, but it was done. So it was to my great disappointment when I came back here in 2013 that the first thing I heard Dotson was doing, the police chief, was that he was now going to do another redistricting. And every time they have changed the districts, except for when they split the 3rd into 2, it was been the promise that we're going to have better policing, it's going to be safer. That has not happened at all. Okay, in fact, quite the opposite has happened. When Dotson did it, I sat right there, I think, where the alderwoman from the 5th and alderman from the 21st sat right, where the former alderman, and we questioned him at length because the police chief said, this will be better, and everybody's gonna have equal, number of police, and it's based on the calls. And I remember the alderman from the 21st saying to him, so are you equating if somebody calls for littering with people getting killed or the home invasions and things? And they had quite a long, discussion about it, and we couldn't get the, police chief to think any different then, and that's when the 6 really got bigger, which that should have been changed and made smaller even back then. And I think that was right before we took over the police when this happened. I really hadn't been following this board bill, and I talked to the current alderman of the 21st Ward this morning about it, and I came to I wanted to add my support. I think you just heard the police chief say he's known that this has not been a good thing for the last 2 years as he's been the police chief. And when people want to talk about crunching their numbers, if you already know something is not good, I have given you the benefit, or we have given you the benefit of 2 years to change that. And now you're saying, give me 6 more months, because now I'm gonna get my number crunching done. But in the meantime, we're operating under a system that he himself, the police chief or commander as he's known now, has said is not a good idea, and he's known that all along. So, and he said he implemented that triangle, but I think the best time that I've ever known my policing in my community was when we were in districts, and we had 8 districts then. I like the idea of the 9th because I really do believe the 6th should be split into another district. So I think that is a good idea. We now have control of our own police. I know that's kind of hard for them sometimes because they don't think they're under local control, and they don't think about themselves being as civil servants, but they are. This has been a giant failure each time they've made it bigger and larger. Government does not always work by getting larger and more efficient. We talk about that sometimes, but you gotta hear the people and service the people. So I just wanted to come and testify and say, and since 1991, their move to make things bigger and more efficient has not worked. And also that I have different numbers than they keep repeating about the number of police we have. And I am going to sit down with the chief because there are some very different numbers that are coming out of personnel than what the mayor has said. And so sometimes I think they use scare tactics with us. And I do want to say that I want to agree that we can take white shirts out and do whatever we need to do to have people on the streets. But it was much better, I believe, when we had smaller police districts and people knew the 8th district or the 6th district. I always represented the 6th, 7th, and 8th under the 20th Ward. And the people knew the police. We don't see the police anymore. And I have told both the police chief and the public safety director that it is not a good idea to have left this ongoing this long. So I want to commend the alderman from the 21st Ward and anybody else who's sponsoring it. I want to add my name to it, to this bill, to say that this is a good bill, and I don't think we should wait one more day. That when you know something has been wrong for 2 years, and if you've not changed it, that's been the time that you've needed. And I would implore this board to move this bill forward. So sometimes you need hot button issues that light a fire under you, so this will be the fire that they need to get it moving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman Collins Muhammad. And while he's coming up, I want to say that it is a little disappointing that we have to do a board bill in order to make a policy change. This is something that I know myself and my colleagues have had a problem with ever since they instituted 6 districts. And when we know something isn't working, we should fix it. We shouldn't always have to do a board bill in order to fix some of our policy issues. I certainly agree with Alderman from the first. Sometimes we have to do this to light a fire up under people. I found myself in HUDs a couple of weeks ago of having to do something to light a fire up under the bureaucracy. So unfortunately, it's something that's in order that we have to do, but it's disappointing that we have to actually do a board bill when we know what the problem is, and we should just fix it from an administrative point of view. So anyway, I just want to share my 2 cents on that, and Alderman, will yield to you to close.
Thank
Just
Oh, I'm
have
sorry.
One quick question. I know the chief left, but I just wanted to publicly request this. I would like for us to all be provided actual number of cars on the street in each district for each shift, so we can see like how that is impacting stuff, and it gives us a true picture of really what the resource and manpower issue is. And also, I would like for him to talk to us in regards to the number of specialized units to see if that may be a part of the problem too, because specialized units keep officers from actually being out on the street. So those are some things that I would hope that the chief could either provide us in writing or come back for the committee and answer.
I'd also like to add
I'll
to
send
that
something,
request.
just so you know. I'll send something to the chief requesting all that.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead, Alderwoman Howard.
I would like to add that we need the number of actual patrol officers, boots on the ground, to the number of leadership, I guess, of sergeants and
I have that
above
here.
sergeants, and how they're deployed on each shift, day, afternoon, and night. Because I fear that sometimes our city is unguarded at night. And I don't know, it's just a sense I get. But I'd like to see those numbers and know, and how many officers are actually on leave or, put on the desk for whatever reason. Okay?
Okay, I think it's fair to say that the actual chairman of this committee, if members of the committee have special requests from the chief, let's go ahead and email him.
Okay.
So he can consolidate all our concerns and send one email over to, so those are some great concerns, some type of
Thank you.
manpower survey, so that we know exactly how the resources are allocated and deployed. That's all good stuff. Okay, round two, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to say this. I respect the chief, and I appreciate all that he is trying to do to stop crime and to keep our communities and our streets safe. But the reality is St. Louis is not safer. You heard him say he has been commissioner for 2 years now, and in these past 2 years proved more than anything that we need a change in police services, and we need a change in how we distribute police services throughout our city. And he kept talking about 6 months, which I understand. But if you read the language of the board bill, this will be implemented within 180 days following the passage of it by the board and signed by the mayor. So he will have 180 days. That's roughly 9 months to redistrict the police division across the city into 9 districts. So we actually, he will have roughly 2 more months than what he initially asked for to do it. And we cannot afford 6 months. I don't think so. Crime has gone up in my ward. Crime has gone up in many of your wards and our colleagues' wards. We don't have 6 months to wait for data and imaginary numbers and figures. And if this was a real problem, police resources or police districting or response times, and this is something that he should have presented to the board and to this committee before today, and I say that respectfully. We don't have time to waste. I respectfully ask, humbly ask this committee to pass out Board Bill 107 with a due pass recommendation.
You want to make that in the motion?
I make that a motion. Second.
It's been moved, Alderwoman Howard, second by who?
I'll second it.
Alderman, Chairman Vaccaro. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard.
Aye.
Alderman Ornowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Chairman Vaccaro.
Aye.
7 aye votes.
Board Bill 107 comes out of committee with a due pass recommendation. Next board bill before us is Board Bill number 94, sponsored by Alderman Collins Muhammad and Alderman Vaccaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief in the interest of time. Board Bill 94 is simple. It creates accountability and transparency as it relates to the city's policies and usage of surveillance technology. Of course, we all see cameras popping up in our ward. We hear the talk of area surveillance and different methods such as that to get a handle on crime. So what this does is protects citizens' rights to privacy. And again, it's just a system of checks and balances. It is a simple board bill. It has been introduced in other cities that use surveillance technology to record crime or or use it as a crime prevention tool. So this will just establish a set of policies that restrict the city of St. Louis and its various departments or divisions who use surveillance technology from invading the rights of private citizens.
Okay. Alderwoman Howard.
I have no questions.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
No questions.
Alderwoman Pam Boyd.
No questions.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
No questions.
Okay, we'll go ahead and open it up. Alderwoman Rice, any questions? No. Okay. We'll go into the public comment section. First up is Robert Gaskell Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Dr. Robert Gaskell Clemens. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the City of St. Louis. I'd like to start out by saying I certainly get in a...
Move closer to the microphone.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'd like to start out by saying I certainly get and share the concerns over citizens' privacy when it comes to the city's use of technology. However, having read the board bill, there's some serious concerns when it comes to potentially unintended consequences, given the way that the current bill is crafted. To start off with, the definitions included in the bill are, in my opinion, too broad. The way that surveillance systems are defined, the way genetic and biometric information is defined, we would also be capturing other systems in use by the police department and law enforcement, such as DNA testing systems and fingerprint systems, all of which are stringently already controlled by state and federal law. Additionally, it would capture systems used for wiretaps and things like that as surveillance systems, again, already regulated by state and federal law, so definitions being too broad. The other issue is it would unduly constrain the delivery of city services and the pursuit of new technologies. For instance, when it comes to protection of civil rights, typically the conversation tends to center around how video feeds are being used and the ability to target specific individuals using those video feeds. The fact of the matter is, nobody's continuously watching these video feeds from these 500 cameras. Typically, these video feeds are accessed when a crime occurs. Nobody is sitting there and continuously monitoring these 500 cameras, much less monitoring all of them to identify specific individuals and track their movements. Second, video and video feeds, as technology is dramatically changing, as is pointed out in the current draft, we have other opportunities when it comes to all this video footage that we're collecting. For instance, there's technology out there right now which can comb through these video feeds and use those feeds for traffic monitoring. That can then feed other systems that can do things like adaptive traffic light switching. So these same video feeds, we have the opportunity to start using them in new ways to make an impact on not just public safety, but also transportation and, numerous other areas. Additionally, this bill would have the potential to further delay other projects, such as ward projects, because now, on the way this bill is written, if an alderman wanted to pursue a ward project Now there's another layer of approvals because they would have to then come back to the full Board of Aldermen to get their project approved because it would technically qualify as a change in the surveillance plan. Another issue with this bill is it would force the city to assume liability and risk that it shouldn't have. For example, there are several community organizations out there already who fund and deploy their own camera networks, and all they do is send a feed from their cameras back to the city. This bill is binding on the city, but not community organizations. So we would then ultimately either have to assume control and responsibility for their independent camera system deployments, or shut off our feed that we get from them, which then would, further frustrate public safety because now we wouldn't be getting the feeds from the Central West End. We wouldn't be getting the feeds from other community organizations which have gone so far as to deploy their own systems. Additionally, it could complicate initiatives that are already underway to start sharing video footage with other law enforcement agencies such as bi-state development security forces. We have cameras that have a better view of a bus stop than bi-states has. We should be, in the interest of public safety, we should be sharing that kind of information with bi-state, with campus security forces that also have policing authority. This can further complicate those relationships. Another issue is this board bill makes the wrong department ultimately accountable for the city's use of surveillance systems. The Department of Public Safety, if the concern is civil rights violations based on misuse of surveillance technology, then ultimate accountability should not reside with the Department of Public Safety. The police department falls under the Department of Public Safety. We're advocating that overall accountability for how the city uses surveillance technology needs to rest firmly on the mayor and the office of the mayor. Another part of the reason for that is what we're after to establish accountability is a clear separation between who the primary users of surveillance technology are and who's administering them and who's auditing them, and make sure that those are two different groups of people. Also, the way that this current bill is worded, it shifts system administration and the burden for system administration away from departments that are already responsible for it, shifts it to the Department of Public Safety, which doesn't have the resources for it. I'll give you one example. Any equipment that transmits video data would fall under the purview of this ordinance. Most video data is transmitted over the city's network. Responsibility for managing the city's network currently falls under the Information Technology Services Administration, the police department's information technology, airports information technology, water, all work together to maintain the city's network. This ordinance, given the way that it's worded and the way things are defined, would shift that responsibility away from all of those departments over to the Department of Public Safety. That doesn't have the resources to manage or audit or maintain those kinds of assets. Additionally, the unredacted reporting requirements and the reporting requirements themselves would further expose the city to risk. To put information out there around the configuration of anything that collects this kind of information or touches that kind of information would be putting sensitive information out there that could then expose the city to cybersecurity threats and things like that. Additionally, the types of changes that would need to occur as a result of this ordinance would take thousands of man-hours to implement and continuously monitor. And I don't think that the fiscal or operating impact of that is clearly understood. Also, I would hope that that we would be conscious about the lift that would then be placed on the board, especially when it comes to keeping up with the pace of technology, changes that would need to be made, the types of deployments that would need to be approved. For instance, one of the things under this ordinance that would need to be approved is I currently have an request for bids out for better cameras. That's subject to the city's very rigorous procurement process. Does the board really want to involve itself in the vendor approval of cameras that would be selected as a result of a rigorous procurement process? So, another issue is the metrics. The other issue is the use of metrics to, clearly understand the outcomes and positive impact that the use of surveillance technology is having. At the end of the day, surveillance technology is a tool. We are not going to achieve our public safety outcomes just by deploying more cameras. So we need to be very clear about how we're defining success when it comes to surveillance technology as a tool. If we're going to try and apply metrics around, level of crime reduction, there are so many other variables when it comes to that surveillance technology has absolutely nothing to do with. So, as a proposed solution, the board passed a resolution back in the spring asking me to create a report on the city's use of surveillance technology and make recommendations on policy moving forward. That had a deadline of September, and I'd stated even before that got passed that I can target the fall, but maybe not September. So here's what's happened between the time that resolution was passed and now. I have actually been able to engage, being an army of one, I've actually been able to engage some independent individuals to start pouring through what are other states doing, what are other municipalities doing, how are they getting themselves in trouble in the federal court system. That level of research just concluded last month. Based on information I've been able to get as far as how surveillance technology is currently being used, based on information that's actually being collected, we've already started crafting a new privacy policy, which would go out in the form of an executive order. It's in its first draft right now. I'm finalizing feedback from various operating departments because it's not just public safety. It's also the Department of Human Services, Information Technology Services Administration, Board of Public Service. They're all stakeholders in how surveillance technology gets acquired, gets deployed, and achieving the outcomes associated with the use of surveillance technology. So what I'm asking for is, before you pass an ordinance around citizen privacy, allow me to complete the task that you gave me. So what I'm asking for is an additional 30 days to be able to produce that policy and send it to the board. The reason I have not shared previous drafts of this policy is because it would be irresponsible to do so. Until I have a chance to get the input from all the departments, each draft has changed radically. So things that somebody would have seen in the third draft, I can guarantee you, changed dramatically in the fourth. So what we don't want to do is incite concern over the content in a draft that's not ultimately going to end up in the final draft or near final draft that would be put in front of the board. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Let's see if we have any questions since he is a city employee and he is currently working on this particular issue. We'll go ahead and see if any members of the committee have any questions for you. Alderwoman Howard.
Have you been in communication with Alderman Collins?
I have not. I have met with Privacy Watch and members from the ACLU twice and outlined for them what the approach was going to be and what kind of content was going to be included in this policy. But like I said, it hasn't gotten to the point where it's ready to start, to share it back out with them. But I did make a commitment when I met with them to get a copy to them and give them a chance to provide feedback.
Okay. So you're covering basically what's covered in this bill to protect the city and...
I'm covering I can tell you, I am covering all the themes that are included in this bill, and in a lot of ways, our privacy policy that we're working on takes things a step farther to actually be very, very specific about permitted and intended use with very clear restrictions and caveats for how long things can happen. Very clear responsibility as far as separation between users and administrators, very clear audit requirements, very clear requirements around metrics for any department that's going to have access to this system, which can actually adequately measure the use of a surveillance system's impact on outcomes.
Various, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
thank
all
you.
the themes are covered, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. First of all, thank you for your breadth of knowledge on this whole situation. I'll just say that for me and my constituents, we just definitely want to be safe. I understand all the legalities that come into play with this, but Big Brother watching is not a boogeyman in my community because we welcome the surveillance and now how we go about it. I understand that there should be some parameters in place as far as storage, how long you keep stuff, how you monitor it, who can have access to it. I get all of that, and I think as a city, we definitely need to work that out and put those parameters in place. But I'm definitely in support of cameras. I think we need them. In my ward, not-for-profit, they purchased their own cameras, and they gave the police department access to those cameras by way of watchtower. And if this, as it's written, would prohibit that, then it would be something that I couldn't support, because with our cameras in the neighborhood that I live in, we solved one of the first murders via camera. And that case was the guy was convicted and everything, and that was due to the neighborhood organization having cameras and giving the police access. So cameras are important in our community, and so however we can move forward to figure out how we need to handle it or whatever, I'm in support of that.
Alderwoman, to be clear, the ordinance itself does not prevent us from working with community organizations. It's the unintended consequences based on what's in other parts of the ordinance that would expose the city to liability. Because I'll give you an example, and I'll just pick on the Central West End here. They fund their own network, they fund their own deployment, they maintain it themselves. The city does not have authority over how they use that system. So if they independently were to use it in a way that's inconsistent with this ordinance or resulted in a civil rights violation, because they're sending that feedback to the city, now that gives rise to questions as to whether or not the city's liable for that.
Well, it's my hope that we can possibly meet somewhere in the middle regarding this, to make sure that everybody is talking, and so we do what's in the best interest of the public, the constituents, what's feasible for the city. Because what's the fiscal impact of doing something like this, or how would that impact us?
The issue around fiscal impact is around who this bill makes responsible and accountable for policy and managing these systems, and how that's different from how these systems are actually operate. And the other part of the fiscal impact is due to the scope of the definitions. I think that you have inadvertently trapped systems that you may not have been intending to target. So I can't give you a number as to what the fiscal impact would be. I can tell you that even with the policy that we're about to put forward, there is a large fiscal impact, but the operating departments can absorb that because resources are shifting around in departments that have, from departments that don't have enough resources to departments that have more resources. And the policy also buys us some runway for training and things like that to make sure.
And so the policy that, I guess that's already in the works or whatever, on the city side of it, have you all been communicating with other organizations who may have some concerns about how things are structured? Have you all talked to like the ACLU or talked to any other organization to try to, you know, package it all together?
I have met with them. I have met with representatives from the ACLU and Privacy Watch twice. I initially met with them when the resolution was passed to capture what their primary concerns were around how the system is used, how the system's administered, how things are audited, who has access to it, and I built all of those into the policy that's currently being crafted. I then met with them again, I would say midsummer, to give them an update where I said, you know, the best approach to take right now is to focus on the future. So start with the policy that governs from the day the policy is adopted, use moving forward. Then we can figure out the degree to which we want to understand what's been done historically. Because I can tell you, civil rights violations based on the current, feeds from these 500 cameras haven't occurred because nobody's constantly watching these cameras.
And so what's your timeline on having what you all are currently working on laid out? What's the timeline? What could we see there?
I'm asking for 30 days. The fifth version of the policy, I'm pending input from one department. After that, I should have a stable draft. So I'm asking for 30 days. I do not believe it will actually take that long to get a draft that's ready to send out to Privacy Watch, the ACLU, the Board of Aldermen. Additionally, when those go out, I want to make sure they get released in a way to where there's an opportunity to explain and go into detail what each of the clauses in the policy means, to try and prevent misinterpretation that could incite concerns when it could just be that a clause was not, worded properly or something like that. So this isn't something that, this is a very sensitive issue, it's a very real issue, it's a very near and dear issue, so this isn't the type of thing where you just throw a policy over the fence and,
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Alderman Pam Boyd. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderman Muhammad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to address everything that Mr. Gaskin said. And honestly, I'm perplexed because we walk past each other almost every other day in City Hall, and you have never pulled me aside and say, I have a problem with your board bill. I'm frustrated by that. That's disrespectful. No, I'm talking. That's disrespectful to me because you could have came to me and said, let's talk about this, and you did not. So, and next, you also said that you believe the use of surveillance technology rests on the power of the mayor? I didn't know we had a monarch. That was your words. You believe that surveillance technology rests under the power of the mayor? Absolutely not. And there is no fiscal allocation with this board bill. There's no fiscal note. This is not a financial matter. It's only a set of policies that will regulate the usage of surveillance technology. I don't see why that's a problem. You also said that you believe that this is not a law department or public safety department issue. I agree with you. I plan on introducing a floor substitute in the Board of Aldermen that would give it to a separate entity. Honestly, and you said it, I want to give it to CREA, as they should have it. And you say that this will stop the RFP process, or that you guys are proposing an executive order to redo surveillance technology usage. And it's perplexing because you haven't shared that with me, and I'm the sponsor of this bill. This is something that we could have talked about. I'm honestly perplexed, and I'm a little pissed off. And then you said reporting requirements will expose the city to risk. Well, it should. There is going to be a risk. That risk is transparency and accountability. was the city so afraid of for passing this ordinance? What is the city doing that it does not want to share with the public? That's a problem for me. So it does not expose the city. It creates transparency in the city. You also said that, I'm sorry, I was just jotting down different things that you said that I think is completely BS. You also said that this change will require thousands of man-hours. Well, that's fine. Let's use those thousands of man-hours. We got departments that do absolutely nothing. I don't know what your department actually does either. You're a chief tech. How much do you make, sir? How much do you make as the chief technology officer? I'm sure over $100,000, am I right?
That's correct.
I know. So how about we cut your salary, refund some people to go look at how we can actually do this? Would you be in favor of that? Because you're the chief technology officer. That's a cabinet level position. You don't really supervise anybody, but you are in charge of the usage of technology in the city. But and it's a cabinet level position and you don't supervise anyone. So how about we cut your salary and we go fund it? And I'm ticked off because you never came to me. I'm ticked off. You never came to me.
Well, to be
if we're supposed to be
perfectly-
colleagues working together, moving the city forward, I get it. You serve the mayor. That's fine. I serve the 13,000 people in the 21st Ward and in North St. Louis. I'm pissed off to another degree.
To be
This is-
honest,
I'm
I'm
talking. Why
frustrated.
do you keep interrupting me? Huh? Why? I'm still talking. Clearly, you have something so important to say. I'm going to be quiet so you can say it. Go
What I was going to say is I'm equally as frustrated and ticked off as you are. I was first made aware of this ordinance yesterday. I was first passed a draft of this ordinance yesterday. Had I known that this was something that you were working on and that you were sponsoring, I most certainly would have reached out to you, if for no other reason than I was already operating on, A, it would have been the right thing to do, and B, I'm already operating under a resolution to start to hammer some of this stuff out. So I get it.
I want to speak to that too. The resolution which was passed in the 2018-2019 session, that was resolution number 243. They gave you a deadline to report back to the board on surveillance use technology. That deadline has surpassed. You come back in asking for an additional 30 days. Correct?
Yes.
No, I'm correct. You were supposed to report back September 16, 2019. You did not. Did you send a memo to the chairman of this committee or a memo to the president's office saying that I need an additional 30 days? I doubt it. And this is a part of a larger problem that goes outside of you. It goes to the lack of collaboration and cohesiveness with the mayor's office to work with legislators to get things done. This report should also include an assessment of the current use, recommendation for future use, future policies to be established, federal, state, and laws or regulations that will be considered as policies are developed, as well as federal court decisions that will be incorporated regarding the use of surveillance technologies in municipalities. Be it resolved that this report will be completed September 16, 2019, and the chief technology officer who supervises no one makes $100,000 shall submit a copy to the clerk of the Board of Aldermen and or the chair of the Public Safety Committee. That was passed February 2019. Did you do that? So
Did
this
I
was passed
submit a
in
report?
February. You had several months to communicate with me, the chairman of this committee, the president's office, or your supervisor, the mayor, that you need an additional 30 days. You have not done it. Now, for some strange reason, all of a sudden, you find out that Board Bill 94 is being moved, and it just so happened the day before you find out it's going to committee. I find that hard to believe. I find that extremely difficult to believe. And if you've actually been communicating effectively with Privacy Watch, then you would know that we were moving forward with this board bill. You said you talked to them over the course. This was passed in September. I'm sorry, this was passed in February 2019. This is almost a year here. You said you talked to them twice. You couldn't be too concerned because you only met with them twice over a 8-month period. So if you was communicating with them honestly, or if you was communicating with me, then you know we was moving forward with this board bill. And again, we walk past each other every day. And the funny thing is, I say hi to you every day. Sometimes you respond, sometimes you don't. Maybe you're on the move. I make it my mission to say hi to anybody that's African American when I see them every day, or anybody in general. Sometimes you say hi, sometimes you don't. It's fine, but we see each other almost every day, and you never came back to me. And again, it's part of a larger issue. The mayor's lack of cohesiveness to work with legislators. This was passed in February. You were supposed to report back September 16th. You have not. I'm inclined to think that if we give you additional 30 days, you still won't report back, or you might report back saying you need an additional 30 days, or you need another 30 days. And again, you know what? This must be the running phrase for anybody that works for the mayor, because the police chief said the exact same thing. I need 6 months. I need 30 days. This is ridiculous. There is no fiscal note. This is only policies that regulate the use of surveillance technology. And you say you're working on an executive order now with the mayor to get this done. Well, how about we forget that executive order? How about you come work with me, continue to work with Privacy Watch, and we incorporate whatever you have in that executive order that we think is translatable or that we think is appropriate, and we incorporate that into the ordinance that I'm going to pass. Because I also know this, whether you pass it, whether the mayor signs our executive order, under the charter of the city of St. Louis, executive orders do not have clout over ordinance passed by this legislative body. So y'all could pass your executive order, your EO, whatever you want to do. I'm going to move forward with Board Bill 94. You could work with me to get it done. I welcome your help and your assistance. But I'm just perplexed that you all of a sudden find out that this is going to be moved the day after, which was yesterday. This is ridiculous. Everything you said really has no merit to it. It doesn't. This does not slow down the process. This does not create an imbalance between city departments. And there is no fiscal impact. And again, the mayor should not be the resting authority over surveillance technology usage in the city. Additionally, this will not take thousands of man-hours to do. It doesn't. It's reporting requirements that departments will use to report back to the Board of Aldermen and to report to the at-large community. And it's not a risk. It creates transparency. I don't get why that's a big issue. It was something else you said too. I'm sorry. I was writing real sloppy because I'm trying to catch every invalid thing that you pretty much said. But I was writing real sloppy, so I didn't. But I think I made my point here. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions or comments. You can go on to the other committee members.
Okay, Alderwoman Annie Rice.
Thanks so much for letting me ask some questions here. So I wanted to touch base on one of the things that you said was that this board bill would move oversight over our technology use from your department into public safety. So it would consolidate some of the areas of technology we currently have into public safety oversight. Am I restating that correctly?
Yes, given the way that a surveillance system is defined, implementation would shift responsibility for certain IT systems away from the departments that currently own them to the Department of Public Safety.
Okay. And in your opinion, at the moment, is there a possibility that that's a good thing to have them in one place, or do these departments need to have control over their systems in order to best utilize them?
It's a good thing to start to centralize certain systems. Not every system needs to be centralized. It's a good thing to centralize certain systems. The city's already working on that, but system centralization occurring under the Information Technology Services Administration, not the Department of Public Safety. Okay. The whole charter for the Information Technology Services Administration is to administer and manage the city's IT systems.
Okay. And then, so do you have any specific examples of what is currently not under public safety but would move under these defined terms?
For instance, underneath the term of surveillance system and surveillance technology, it refers to anything that transmits surveillance data. Our city network transmits surveillance data. So the city's network is not included in the list of excluded systems listed in the ordinance. So that begs the question, in compliance with this ordinance, does that now mean that the city's entire network, which transmits this information from the cameras to the back-end servers, now fall underneath the purview of the Department of Public Safety? And decisions about how that network is maintained, managed, decisions around how we invest in network upgrades, are those now subject to, moved to the purview of the Department of Public Safety, and are those kinds of investments now included in the kinds of investments that the board would then want to approve, just because transmits is included in the definition?
Okay, that's helpful. I think all of this technology, we're on the cutting edge of all of this technology. We don't have ordinances and laws and even language sometimes to encapsulate what we're discussing here. And I absolutely support a privacy plan. I think that it is of utmost concern to our citizens to have very clear guidelines here about what the city has, what we're doing with it, what's allowed, who owns it, how we access it, all of that. And so I am glad that we're hearing this today. I would also hope that the committee would consider holding and having these revisions come before this committee so we can have a robust conversation again with Mr. Gaskell-Clemens and potentially with public safety, maybe someone from the Real-Time Crime Center, that type of thing, because we can't have that conversation on the floor if it's a floor substitute. So that's, and I also, I just want to say also thank you for all of the work that you're doing around the smart cities initiatives as well. I know that we've thrust a lot on you in a city that is up and coming in technology, in startups, with geospatial thing, like everything that we're doing right now. You have a massive job, and coordinating between all of our departments is never easy. We get calls from our constituents all the time asking us, well, why isn't some department doing this? And we don't have oversight over that department, but we're expected to communicate with them, and there are lots more walls around City Hall and closed doors than I think people realize sometimes. So just sort of voicing a general frustration on all of our parts that it's difficult to work here. And so I thank you, members of the committee and the sponsors of this bill, for moving forward and engaging with community groups, and also yourself for the work that you do too. So thank you for letting me ask questions.
I just want to say I've had a chance to work with Dr. Robert over the past year or so, and I find him to be, a man of good character who cares about the city, who's passionate about technology, and who's concerned about process. I'm reminded of a couple of board bills that we worked on together, Dig Right and Dig Once, in which it was a collaboration of different stakeholders out in the community, like utility companies, before we actually crafted a board bill to deal with that. Technology, the surveillance technology is a very sensitive issue. It's something in which a board bill, if I remember correctly, for the past 4 years have been introduced and never passed. It seems like there's been some miscommunication. There was a resolution, there's a current resolution to deal with this subject matter. That was done, has been presented in February. So, and then there was a report that was due in September. Certainly this is a tough issue and a very sensitive issue to deal with. What I heard was there was work done with ACLU, work done with Privacy Watch, and so that's ongoing. At the same time, this board bill decided to surface and move through. So somehow some wires got crossed, and that's unfortunate. I'm not going to question somebody's integrity on whether or not they heard about this today or yesterday or last month, but this is a sensitive issue that requires more than one meeting and public engagement. There is potentially an undue burden on the public safety department. I'm not sure, because we haven't called on the public safety department to speak on that, but there is potentially a fiscal note associated with this. This is, again, a tough issue, and it's an issue that we need to tackle. We've been kicking this can down the road for quite some time, and I think we now have somebody in place that understands technology a lot better than we do, who's a technical expert in this field, that we might want to listen to the voice of that person. So I just want to say that because I feel the tension, you know, with the sponsor of the bill, and I will hope that there was no disrespect on anybody's part to not communicate. The problem that we have around City Hall is far too often we do forget to communicate with people that we're imposing requirements and policy on, and we need to do a better job with that. And especially, you know, we as aldermen, and I can speak for myself, but I believe in process. Process is everything, and the more people you include in the process, the less the tensions are at the end of the process, and hopefully we come up with something that's a win-win strategy. And with that, we're going to just go ahead and move to the rest of the public comment, so thank you. Next up is Sarah, looks like Baker, forgive me if I didn't pronounce that right, with the ACLU of Missouri.
You did it perfectly.
Okay.
I have some Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Baker. I'm the Director of Policy and Legislative Work at the ACLU of Missouri. I want to start out by going over specifically what is actually in this bill, because the testimony you just heard does not represent at all what is the content of the board bill before you. The ACLU strongly supports Board Bill 94. We, on behalf of our 15,000 members throughout the state, are speaking out in favor of this legislation because it protects civil liberties. It protects your and my right to privacy, which is a cornerstone of our democracy. I want to go through first what's actually in this bill, and then I'll go through each and every point that was brought up before this committee on why the mayor's office appears to have some questions about the bill. First, this bill is designed just to lay out regulations for how surveillance technology is used in the city of St. Louis. Why is that? Because our city is operating as if it were the Wild West. We have 600 cameras throughout the city. As was mentioned before, they're not always being watched. Well, we don't know who's watching them, how they're being watched, how the data is being stored, who's being tracked, what communities are being targeted, and even if they're effective. Why don't we have that information? Because we don't have a board bill like 94. We have other surveillance technology that's used in the city of St. Louis, Stingray devices, which can sweep up data from your cell phone, and we don't know how that information is being used. Why? Because we have no regulations in place that dictate how that data is being stored, how is it being used, and how it's actually being followed through with on behalf of the city of St. Louis. Those are two examples of the numerous attempts at surveillance technology we have throughout our city that are completely unregulated. So all this bill does, doesn't transfer authority, it doesn't do any of the number of things that you just heard represented here. All this bill does is say the city of St. Louis needs a surveillance technology plan. That plan needs to be created to cover all surveillance technology used in the city of St. Louis. Once we have that plan in place, if you wish to use surveillance technology in the city of St. Louis, you should submit a proposal for how that's going to be used. When you submit that proposal will get initial approval or disapproval by the Director of Public Safety, just to say, does it comply with the city's policy? If it is approved, it will come before the Public Safety Committee and be voted on to say, is this policy, or is this program rather, in compliance with the policy of the city of St. Louis, yay or nay? Then it will get a vote by the Board of Aldermen to say, we approve of this surveillance technology being used, or we don't. That's the process for getting a surveillance technology approved in the city of St. Louis. It would all be done in correspondence with a policy that would be created through the Department of Public Safety. So this would be a drafting period. This would be even longer than the 30 days that's being asked for to come up with an audit that's overdue by a month already. This would be a longer period for the city of St. Louis to say, what is our surveillance technology policy going to look like? The Director of Public Safety would put together a draft. There would be a public hearing on that. You all would vote and say, does this policy make sense for the city of St. Louis? If you all approve as the city's representatives, then that policy would go into place. And anyone who wanted to use a surveillance technology in the city of St. Louis, any city entity, would simply have to get their surveillance technology approved so that we could verify that it complies with civil liberties, that it is going to be effective, that we understand how that technology is going to be used. That's it. That's what this bill does. It says, here's the policy, submit your plan, we'll approve or disapprove. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the year, we're going to ask you to report on that. Why? Because we need to know if it's effective. Other cities who have used surveillance technology, including LA, San Francisco, Chicago, and Washington, found 3 things about surveillance technology. They found that it had a heavy cost burden, that it did not decrease crime, and that it had a discriminatory impact because of the communities of color that were targeted persistently with surveillance technology. So all we're putting forward today with Board Bill 94 is a recognition that this city needs a policy. When the city comes up with a policy, we should have plans that correspond with it. And when those plans are going well, we'll continue them in use, and when they're not going well, we'll allow the Board of Aldermen to take its rightful position as the representatives of the people and say this violates civil liberties, or this targets minority communities and cannot continue and must be reformed. That is all that's in the bill before you. I want to quickly go through some of the issues that were brought up by the mayor's office today. First, I was pleased to hear that the Chief Technology Officer shares the concerns that we have about privacy in the city of St. Louis. But I do want to dispel some of the assertions that were made about conversations with the ACLU. The ACLU has never engaged with the mayor's office on their executive order. We did not see their executive order until it was leaked recently. In that draft, we strongly object to what the mayor's office is putting forward as a surveillance technology policy for the city of St. Louis. We have had negotiations in the past about the content of this bill. That, in fact, has been a very long trajectory. As the chairman mentioned, that's been going on over 4 years. I have so many emails on my computer about this bill from the mayor's office and back and forth that I actually think it might be what had killed my computer. However, when we were doing the negotiations on this bill, we got to a place where language was incredibly tight on our end. It is very close to the language that's been passed in 12 other cities throughout the United States of America, and the influx that we've seen of man hours being used, of obligations for the city, has been minimal. In those states, we're talking about 10 to 15 programs that come forward each year and say, do we comply with civil liberties or do we not? So when we talk about negotiations with the mayor's office, let's be very clear, we've had no conversations about the executive order, not a one. We have had previous conversations about drafts of this bill, and we came to a point where we felt like this was the best bill to move forward with, and it corresponds with those other cities across the country that have put forward this legislation and found the obligations on their staffs to be minimal and the protections for civil liberties to be important. Next, I want to talk about the definitions in this bill. The person testifying before me mentioned that he felt that the definitions were overly broad. Again, we have whittled those definitions as much as possible. The definition that you'll see in this bill is incredibly precise because it covers exactly the type of surveillance technology we wish to cover. Could it include DNA systems? Yes. That's actually important, though, because the information that is transmitted through a DNA system can tell information about your family's medical history, your relationships with others, and those sorts of information. Yes, you should have privacy protections in place when there's a policy about DNA. When there's a policy about wiretaps, I have 2 words, well, 3 really. Get a warrant. That is what you should be doing when it comes to wiretaps in the city of St. Louis. And in fact, the lack of policy that our city has in place when it comes to wiretapping in the city of St. Louis and the way in which we use surveillance technology has previously gotten cases thrown out in court because they've been seen to violate the 4th Amendment. Overly broad searches and seizures of data cannot be tolerated in the city of St. Louis. Another point that was brought up is, well, technology is evolving so rapidly. If we pass Board Bill 94, we're going to miss out on opportunities. Absolutely not. What Board Bill 94 does is says, if you want to use surveillance technology, let's leave it up to the people's elected representatives if you get to use it or not. That's all it says. So in terms of missing out on opportunities, I'm okay with the city of St. Louis missing out on opportunities that might disproportionately affect members of our community. I'm okay with St. Louis missing out on opportunities that have not proven to be effective anywhere else in the country or in the world. What I want is evaluation of those policies, and that's what Board Bill 94 does. It doesn't say we have to miss out on anything. It says we're going to take a measured, policy-informed approach when we're looking at surveillance technology in the city of St. Louis. There was also the allegation that this could delay ward projects and a particular concern over cameras. I want to address that head on. This bill does not in any way prevent any individual, any city entity from moving forward with cameras for their ward. In fact, if you're replacing units in your ward or adding in-kind units to your ward, you get to do that under this bill. We made a specific exception for that to make sure that individuals would be able to expand the use of cameras if they choose. What this bill is designed to do is say, if you want to increase surveillance technology, if you want to go rummaging through the lives of St. Louis residents, then what you need to do is have a program that's actually approved by the Board of Aldermen, not do this all behind closed doors in public-private partnerships as has been done before. There's also an allegation raised that this would force the city to assume liability for the use of surveillance technology. Right now, we're sitting in a moment where this city is very liable for how surveillance technology is used in the city of St. Louis. If we were to approach the St. Louis Police Department and realize that their surveillance technology were to violate the First, Fourth, or 14th Amendment, we could easily bring a constitutional claim against the city itself. But what we're trying to do in this is make sure that we have standards set going forward for how exactly surveillance technology is going to be used in our city and actually diminish the liability that will be held by the city, unlike the current circumstance that exists today, where you're operating in a Wild West situation where there's no regulation of cameras. There was also an assertion made that we won't be able to share data. You absolutely are able to share data under this policy. What we're asking you to do is get approval for that data sharing. This committee and the board overall has come out very supportive of immigrant rights, for example. So you might have some qualms if data was being shared directly with ICE. What this bill allows you to do is say, I see that you're going to share data with ICE. I do not want that to be passed in the city of St. Louis, and actually take action. We're not limiting who you can share it with. We're saying put it down on paper so we understand how this is going to work, and we can make sure that it's going to protect civil liberties in the city of St. Louis. There was also a point raised that this would change around the system administrator role within departments. Absolutely not. We're not asking anyone to change any structure on how their department is set up. What we're asking folks to do is comply with a policy that will be drafted by the Department of, or will be drafted by the Director of Public Safety, that will be approved by you all. And then once they comply with that policy, we're simply saying you can continue your internal oversight in the way you have before, but submit a report at the end of the year so we can see, is it effective? Does it burden civil liberties? That's all we're asking them to do. We're not changing any structures here. We're simply saying the city of St. Louis is going to lay out a process for how surveillance technology works. There was also a point raised that accountability should rest with the mayor. I want to talk about that a little, because the mayor is one elected official. You all are also elected officials designed to represent the local issues that each of your individual wards have. You are in the very best position to say, cameras work in my area, they don't work in another. Or I want to make sure that Stingray technology is something we have access to in this area, but maybe it doesn't work for another ward within the city of St. Louis. You are the person that is closest to the people and should be able to make those decisions as their elected representatives. We've seen what's come out of the mayor's office. In the draft that was leaked from the mayor's office that had absolutely no input from the ACLU or from Privacy Watch, in that draft, we saw that collaboration, for example, with federal agencies like ICE might be allowed in the mayor's draft of that policy. We are not confident in the mayor's office ability to draft a surveillance technology policy that has the democratic input of elected individuals like yourself and that best represents all the wards that are presented in this room and throughout the Board of Aldermen. There was an argument made that this would take too much time, thousands and thousands of man-hours. Well, the good news is we already have models for this. We already know that this legislation is functioning in 12 different cities throughout the United States, and that it has not required a significant burden from any of those cities when it comes to the implementation of this particular ordinance. There was a point raised that there's concern over metrics. I'm deeply troubled by that particular concern being raised. Because if what you're telling me is I don't want a policy in place because I'm concerned about the metrics that measure success, I'm getting the idea that you're not interested in measuring success. Surveillance technology can be used. It can even be used to promote public safety, but it can't be done in that way if you're not measuring its effectiveness, which we don't do under current policy, which the mayor's policy doesn't lay out, and which we must have in place to make sure we can evaluate if a surveillance technology is useful or if it's just a waste of our money. When we talk about the audit, last year what we asked the mayor's office to put together was an audit on how surveillance technology is used in the city of St. Louis and some recommendations. But we didn't ask them to come up with this policy that they're putting forward. We still believe that Board Bill 94 is an essential component. It is the component to making sure that civil liberties are protected in the city of St. Louis. When we talk about civil liberties, I want to be very specific. We're talking about the First Amendment. We're talking about the fact that individuals who wish to petition their government and to protest their government in the city of St. Louis feel targeted by surveillance technology, and it is chilling their speech in that they do not feel comfortable or would not feel comfortable under a system of mass surveillance or a surveillance plane that we've talked about in the city of St. Louis, coming out and doing one of the civic duties to this city, which is making sure that their government officials are being held accountable to them. We're talking about the Fourth Amendment, your right to be protected from unlawful search and seizure. Right now, the city of St. Louis is invading your privacy. That is a fact. Board Bill 94 is simply allowing you to democratically decide what the policy is going to be going forward to make sure that doesn't happen. And it violates, or could violate, the use of mass surveillance violates the 14th Amendment. This is probably the cornerstone of why we think this is so important in the city of St. Louis. Surveillance technology throughout the United States has consistently been used to target people of color. Oakland has a very specific study about this, comparing census tracts and looking at how surveillance technology was used to target the black community, even though the black community was less likely to have contraband or to be involved in the type of crimes that were being pursued by the police department. That is problematic, because if you have a city that can abuse its surveillance technology systems to go after a particular race, you are violating the 14th Amendment. We have to protect civil liberties with this bill. We can do that and make sure that we uphold the First, the Fourth, and the 14th. I'm going to also talk to you from a personal perspective here. My parents were the subject of a carjacking in the city of St. Louis, and we're residents of the city of St. Louis. They have cameras. I'm fine with them having cameras. If it makes my parents feel an ounce of safety in their daily lives, I'm fine with that happening, because I deeply remember getting that phone call, the shake in my mother's voice, how she trembled when I saw her. I remember every aspect of that. But I'm not fine with government spying, and I don't think you all are either. What we're simply asking to do is, if my parents wish to set up cameras in their garage and connect those to the Real Crime Center, let's have a policy in place for that, so that they know that the data that you're taking from those cameras is being used to go after people who are robbing their property or causing harm to the individuals in their community, and not being used to figure out how often my parents leave their home, or how often they leave to go to a doctor's appointment, or if they're gone on a vacation, or it's not being used to target them with additional information. That is something we can guarantee to the residents of the city of St. Louis if we pass Board Bill 94. We're saying let's use technology in a way that works, let's use technology in a way that's democratically approved, and let's use technology in a way that upholds civil liberties. It is firmly within our grasp with this bill. Thank you.
Okay. That's a lot.
A lot was said before.
Let's see if we have any questions from members of the committee. Alderman Howard.
No questions.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
No question.
Alderwoman Rice.
Sorry, Alderman Mohammed, did you?
He's a sponsor.
Oh, okay, great. So, yeah, I think everybody's head's spinning a little bit, that there's been a lot of different information. So I just want to be very clear. So the resolution that was passed asking for the technology audit, which is what was due back in September, did not say anything about creating a privacy policy. But what the chief technology officer was discussing as far as a policy is something that has traditionally been, or would be an update of something that was passed under Mayor Slay's administration, and now there's sort of an update circulating, and this is the leaked document that we're talking about, right?
So the audit that was passed last year was a resolution that was passed last year, asked for an audit to be completed in September. We sunshined for that audit relatively recently. We were told it does not exist. So they have missed the deadline to provide an audit. What was asked for in that audit was an audit of how surveillance technology is being used in the city of St. Louis and some recommendations, not a policy to lay out how the city of St. Louis should proceed with its use of surveillance technology. This bill says With Board Bill 94, we're asking the Director of Public Safety to come up with a policy that will then be heard by the public. You all will take a vote on it, and that would be the surveillance technology policy for the city of St. Louis. We are not asking the mayor's office to unilaterally come up with a surveillance technology policy. We think that entirely circumvents the democratic process that is laid out in this bill.
Okay, that is very helpful. So basically, again, it would move a policy around the use of this technology to the Board of Aldermen and not something that is purely handled within the mayor's administration or public safety, that we wouldn't have a chance to weigh in on ahead of time as it currently stands.
Right. With the audit that you all passed, you were essentially asking for information and recommendations.
Right.
With the policy, or rather with passing this bill, what you would be asking for is that the Director of Public Safety create a policy for the entire city that you all would approve or disapprove or ask for changes to said policy to be made.
Okay.
So you would have actual impact and input on that versus the mayor unilaterally coming up with something that is not being discussed with legislators.
Okay, and you also disagree with the CTO that this could also include things like our city network and that type of, that this would move responsibility for our city's network into public safety.
We were very specific with the definition of surveillance technology program in the bill.
Right.
We do not think that it's going to move a network, the city's network, into oversight by the Department of Public Safety.
Okay.
We do think that if a city entity, say the streets department, is using surveillance technology, that they would then need to present that as a program that would then be approved or disapproved by this body.
So like the trash task force that has cameras, it's sort of a hybrid under public safety and under the refuse department that they're.
Yeah, because
Something
when
like
you
that
have when you have cameras like that, for example, actually traffic cameras are my favorite example of this. Traffic cameras, yes, can be used to find people who are speeding or who are running red lights. They can also be used to map where you are. So it's incredibly important for the city to have civil liberties protections in place for that, because if not, you can identify, did that person go to church? Did that person go to a rally? All sorts of things like that. That is information that should not be at the city's disposal because it drastically infringes on civil liberties.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, I have a few questions. My first comment, though, it just seems like some of the stuff you were saying, with no disrespect, seems to be extreme. Like the city would be, with their traffic cameras, would be tracking people to see how often they go to work and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, have you heard that some
actually,
municipalities have been doing that in other cities across the country?
Yes,
They're
actually,
tracking citizens?
Well, it's actually how some of this legislation got passed. I'm going to blank on the specific city's name, but I will get it for you.
Okay.
What was done in that case is the mayor actually, the information on their traffic data was sunshined, and they created a map of where their elected officials go. Because that's the data that you have out there operating in this Wild West environment that's not protected from saying, oh, the city shouldn't be able to spy on you in that way, because it is not our business, the city, I mean, to say where our residents should be going on a daily basis.
I mean, but they wouldn't know exactly where you were. I mean, they wouldn't know you sat at Starbucks every day if they had traffic cameras just in different major intersections, right? They may know a geography that you frequent, but they wouldn't know exactly what house and what restaurant you frequent.
Well, we have 600 cameras in the city of St. Louis. That information is a large amount of data. They can form fairly specific trajectories on where you are. Maybe they couldn't tell you that you were at Starbucks versus Mokabee's. Maybe they couldn't tell you that, although I don't think there's a Starbucks next to Mokabee's, so poor example, my problem. But they would be able to tell that you're in that general vicinity and make suppositions about your location from that data. It can get very specific.
Okay. Out of curiosity, have St. Louis County enacted anything like this? Have you proposed this to St. Louis?
We haven't proposed this to St. Louis County yet.
Why not? You can't do it at the same time?
Capacity. We're an office of 11 people.
You know, I find it interesting that people like to use St. Louis City because it's the big city to start, you know, their initiatives. But St. Louis County, no one goes out there and tend to bother St. Louis County with anything. I really like to see people, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but you know, why not start with St. Louis County and let them be the model.
Yeah.
You know, sometime instead of always using St. Louis City. When people want to picket, they come to City Hall to picket. They come to City Hall, to the city of St. Louis for everything that could potentially be negative. But St. Louis County gets a pass on a lot of stuff.
I think
I'm
in
not trying
particular.
to get myself in trouble with the county executive or county
Yeah.
council people. It's just, it gets to be frustrating sometimes. For me, it seemed like the city of St. Louis is the testing ground for stuff.
Well, in particular for this legislation, I think part of the reason the focus is on St. Louis is because we've seen cases thrown out in St. Louis courts related to surveillance technology, basically saying you overreached, we can't move forward with this prosecution because of it. And actually, the ACLU of Missouri has been deeply engaged in St. Louis County as far as the prosecutor's office and in some negotiations with the now county executive. Unfortunately, you know, we have to operate based on the capacity that we have. This would be something we'd be very interested in discussing with them as well. But as you mentioned, this bill's been 4 years in the works in the city of St. Louis.
And never mentioned to St. Louis County over the past 4 years.
I can't say it's never been mentioned, but as I'm certain you recall, there have been some changing political dynamics in St. Louis County that make different opportunities arise at different times.
So you guys, who did you draft this bill with? The ACLU drafted in with who? Who else was on your team?
Yeah, so the ACLU is a partner with Privacy Watch. We're in the coalition with Privacy Watch, and my colleague Alicia is actually going to go through each of the members of Privacy Watch.
Okay.
It also has national support from organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I have a letter from those organizations if you'd like to see that as well.
Now, I'm for doing something like this. You know, don't get me wrong. It's just I have certain questions I just want to bring forth. Did you talk to the public safety director when you drafted this? You guys sat down and
So we spoke last year about this legislation when Alderman Kennedy was working on this legislation, and we did talk to him about it. We brought proposals to his office. He has reviewed the legislation to my knowledge, although perhaps Alderman John Collins Muhammad could talk more deeply to this. We had not heard any additional feedback on this latest substitute version of this bill from his office.
Okay.
I at least have not. I don't know if you have.
I'd be curious as to law enforcement's perspective on this, because I would hope that we're not just issuing, you know, search warrants on ambiguous data, you know.
I hope so, too.
It sounds like we've been doing that. That's kind of stupid at the end of the day.
Well, we have been using
Then
things
we
like.
get it thrown out and, you know, bad people, you know, get out. So,
Yeah. I think that's actually a very valid concern. And some of the way that surveillance technology data is used is in things like predictive policing. And what does predictive policing say? It says where a crime occurred, a crime will occur again. Not necessarily. And it can lead to a huge over-targeting of communities. And so I think it's really important that we get a handle on how surveillance technology is used so we can make sure that it's used in a way that's actually effective and doesn't waste our money and protects civil liberties. I think those two goals are incredibly possible to hold together.
Okay, give me an example. You mentioned the city is already invading our citizens' privacy. How are we doing that?
Well, for example, those dragnet searches that I mentioned earlier, so Stingray technology, which is basically acts as a false cell tower, can sweep up thousands of people's data just through a single use. And so through that information, they can know where was your cell phone being used. So where were you? And that is the type of information that has gotten those types of surveillance cases where they present, we know this guy did this thing because he was there, thrown out because it's an unlawful search.
But if they got a search warrant, then it would have been effective use of the technology.
Yeah, get a warrant.
Okay.
Absolutely. Be specific. That's what is really important to remember with surveillance technology is it can be a useful tool in combating crime, but it needs to be specific to a crime committed, not saying, let's do mass surveillance of everyone who lives in St. Louis.
Right. Show me in the bill where, because it came up from the colleague of the 5th that, you know, if we want to do cameras in our ward, now, of course, some wards have cameras, surveillance cameras, some don't. Where is it excluded?
Yeah, it's a line about in-kind units, and let me see here. I think I highlighted it earlier. Okay, that is on, so I have the substitute version. I don't know if the substitute's been introduced yet, so my comments may be off on page numbers. But it is right above section 5, which on my bill is on page 10, but maybe a different bill, page number for you all.
What section?
So it is under section 4, part F.
F, okay.
okay? There's a bit at the top, but where we're making sure that you can use cameras, as we say, the acquisition of additional units of surveillance technology or the replacement of existing surveillance technology with like in-kind
That's in your
units.
substitute, that's not in here.
It should,
In F.
that's actually been in the bill since 2 years ago, so
Change provisional additions, okay.
my numbers might be different than yours, though.
Line 16. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll read what it actually says. So it says, the acquisition of additional units of surveillance technology or the replacement of its existing technology with like in-kind units shall not be considered a modification of the plan requiring approval subject to the approval procedures of this ordinance. So what that means is if you go about acquiring additional cameras for your ward or you go about replacing those cameras, you don't have to come back to get approval from the Board of Aldermen.
We don't have that.
No.
No, so,
Yeah, it's on page 10.
oh, page 10, she said it was section 5.
It's right above section 5 on page 10. In section F titled modification, so 4F, modification.
Okay. All right, last question, I think. Let's go to section 8, right of appeal. I'm not sure why we need to put that in the board bill. I mean, some things, if you feel aggrieved by the city, you're gonna go to court anyway. Why would the city want to just say in an ordinance that a court shall award cost and reasonable attorney fees to a plaintiff who is prevailing party in an action to enforce this ordinance? Why would we want to do that to ourselves?
Could you tell me what page you're on?
I'm sorry, well, 14. It's right above section 9, so go to C where it says cost. It's in section 8 at the bottom, C, costs. I kind of have an issue with that whole section, though, and why we would
I
want to
think
put that in there.
So that's not in my substitute version of the
Right
bill.
of appeal, you don't have a section that says
I
right
have,
of appeal?
on section
8.
6, unlawful use.
Section 8.
It's
Section 8, yeah.
page 14, line 6, actually.
So, so is your objection to the ability of an individual to appeal if they feel there has been a violation, or is your objection to the costs provision?
I have an objection to that whole clause. I mean, if a person feels like the city have done it wrong, just go to court. I mean, that would be a natural course of action to take. We don't need to, dig ourselves a hole in a bill that says, well, if you lose in court, the city, shall pay reasonable attorney fees. What if the judge doesn't, want that person to pay attorney fees?
Yeah, I mean, it's not saying if you lose your case that you're going to be awarded the cost of bringing your case in the first place.
No, if you win, though. No, this would be a win. Certainly if you lose, you're not going to.
Right, so if you,
But that's for a judge to make a decision. That's not for us to put ourselves
right.
out there like that.
So in the cost section in C, it says a court shall award.
Yeah, why do we need to, yes, a court shall award. Why do we have to put that in the board bill, though?
It's just being specific on the
Why do we
process
have to
that's
be that
actually happening.
specific? Seem like
Because
to me we add more liability to ourselves.
You certainly
The
don't
court's going to do
add,
what it's going to do anyway.
you certainly don't add more liability to yourself. The reason we included this in the bill is because we are laying out an internal process for appeal that you can go before the Director of Public Safety. So we want to be clear
Oh, so
that
this is
if you,
for the city, not what court are you referring to then? Because you're appealing to the city, the public safety director, you're appealing to that person, so what
so
court
we're
calls?
saying, so you have a complaint. You go to the Director of Public Safety and you say, this is my complaint. Do you think it's valid or not? And he renders a decision, right? Okay. If you feel that his decision was invalid at the end of that, you have a right of appeal in the court system, right? So we're trying to create a procedure that allows for less liability for the city, because what it says is, I get to, like a complaints unit, I get to bring a complaint. If I disagree with the decision that you made on my complaint, maybe you resolved my issue, but if I disagree with your decision, then I still get a right to appeal in a court of law. We're just trying to be specific that that is the process that would happen under this.
Does that go without saying, though?
We felt it needed to be said to answer questions about liability that this committee might have brought up. I think it's very clear that it would go to a court of law. However, I also think that this is a super clear way to write it down on paper and make sure that that practice is observed, so that it's clear to the person who's reading it, who says, I have a complaint, that first they can try to resolve that with the Department of Public Safety. If that doesn't work, then they have recourse in court. So it's a clear way to say, these are your rights if you have a complaint.
And give me an example of a potential violation once we put this policy together. Give me an example of a potential violation that I may want to go to the public safety director and appeal.
Okay, so say that we have a data sharing policy that you all have approved that would allow for, that doesn't allow for data sharing with ICE, right? And I have a relative who has been picked up by ICE based on data that was shared from the city of St. Louis. Then I have a complaint because there was a violation of the city's technology policy. I bring that forward to Judge Jimmy Edwards and I say, this happened to my family and I'm bringing a complaint because it violates your policy. Then he can choose to address that complaint and make sure to change the policy himself, or that individual can take him to court. If the policy needs to be changed or if some sort of procedure was lost along the way, he can attempt to redress that.
That person got picked up and was deported. That person got picked up and was deported. So
their family's still here.
So their family could, basically they're asking the city to change that policy.
So it's if a violation, so we agree on the policy that's created for the city. The Board of Aldermen votes and approves that, that's set in stone, right? Then we think that a violation, we being an aggrieved individual, thinks that a violation has occurred, and I would bring, as an aggrieved individual, that complaint before the Director of Public Safety and say, my rights were violated, this is a problem, you need to address this, fix whatever went wrong in the implementation of this policy. And if the Director of Public Safety says, nothing went wrong, this is exactly how it intended to be used, and you still think that that's a violation of the policy, then you can take him to court. Or you can go to court to get redress of your claim.
Okay. For some reason, it's not sitting with me
Okay.
right now. Maybe it's because it's been a long day.
It has
And I probably want to ask some lawyers, you know, how that plays out.
It's basically to create a very clear idea of how you can appeal if you feel your rights have been violated, but also giving the city another chance to address things before you head to court.
I still want to get an opinion of the city council's office on how that works out.
If
but
they
I
want to keep
appreciate
it as folks can just take them to court, we're fine.
Okay. Good information. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I think there's an opportunity to make a good bill out of this. Let me go ahead and take the next person. Ms. Baker, you've been very helpful.
Thank you.
Alicia?
I just want to say also, in regards to the clause you were just talking about, where the cost section, that's also in other related legislation passed around the country that also passes similar legislation such as this to restrict and create a level of accountability in surveillance technology. So it's not uncommon, but I don't think any of us will be opposed to stripping that from this legislation, no, but it's not uncommon.
Okay. I've learned being an alderman and in the courts of law, everything's legal until you go to court. Miss Alicia Hernandez, is she here? Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
I just dropped this. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Yes, so my name is Alicia Hernandez. I am an organizer with the ACLU of Missouri, but I am here as a core member of the Privacy Watch Coalition. So we've talked a bit about, there's been some discussion on engagement, who's talking to who, what kind of outreach has been done, and so I do just kind of want to touch on the outreach and engagement that's been done through the Privacy Watch Coalition. So first of all, the Privacy Watch Coalition is a coalition of grassroots organizations and individuals. Some of the organizations include the ACLU of Missouri, Amnesty International, the St. Louis Group, Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression, the St. Louis chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, and the Organization for Black Struggle. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, this bill has been 4 years in the works. And so within that 4 years, there has been a lot of outreach and engagement in the community. Just last year, there was a lobby day where Privacy Watch brought a group of folks to City Hall to talk to the aldermen. There have been various canvases. Through those canvases, we've knocked on over 1,300 doors and made around 1,130 phone calls. We've had various town halls in different parts of the city. Our most recent town hall within the last couple of months was in the 21st Ward in collaboration with Alderman John Collins Muhammad, and we had over 40 people show up to that. So I just want to stress that surveillance, technology oversight, and Board Bill 94 is absolutely a community-led effort. Other organizations in the city and statewide that have supported this effort and have been in collaboration with us also include Action St. Louis, Arch City Defenders, the Council on American Islamic Relations, that's CARE Missouri, Empower Missouri, Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and the Missourian Immigrant Refugee Advocates. Those are also organizations that have signed on to support and have collaborated with us in the past. Again, I just want to stress that now is the time. It is the time for St. Louis community to have a say in how and whether we are being watched. Thanks.
I'm sorry. Any comments or questions, members of the committee? Let's see here. Alderman Pam Boyd. No. Alderman Clark Hubbard. No. Chairman Vaccaro. Okay, thank you. Next up would be Scott Campus. Hopefully I said that right. K-A, looks like K-M-P-A-S, Privacy Watch.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I am Scott Campus. I live here in North City. So I am exposed to violent and petty street crime, and I understand the need for some surveillance. As has previously been stated, this does not stop any surveillance, but it does bring review and light to where there has been none. The city's privacy policy that exists now has not been followed by the city as reported by the American. There's another policy, the executive order that was leaked. They did not work with us at all, as was previously stated. This was not passed to the chairman. This was, we were more than a month overdue on that audit, and we heard nothing about it until we started bringing it up. So it's not just a hypothetical problem either in terms of the surveillance being misused here in the city. The stingrays have led to court cases being thrown out. That was done in secret. The camera surveillance technology that we have now has been used in real time to follow protesters and other activists, and also after the fact. So it's not just a matter of of the technology being used in real time. Of course, there is too much out there as it is to be for every minute detail to be followed. That would go to solving the crime problem too. There's limited, the data suggests that the surveillance only goes so far, but it does have some use. It's been a long day. Should have gotten some coffee. I didn't think I'd be here this long, so.
We didn't either.
Yeah, I understand. I should have taken that break while some of you did that.
It's okay.
We also know that so we have the boilerplate search warrants. Was in the news 10 years ago that basically system-wide, many officers in the city were just following these boilerplate search warrants. And then they promised to fix that. A couple years ago, an officer was testifying in a court case. The judge said, stop, because he was about to implicate the entire city because they had continued doing so. We know that within the last year or two, actually the last year, that officers in the city were using the private data from crash scenes, the crash reports, and selling that to chiropractors. This implicated hundreds of people's private data here in the city. We also, so the problems here in the city department are systemic, but changes are trying to be made to fix that. One of the problems we have, one of the major reasons that the police have been ineffective is that there's not trust. People are not reporting to them. So this is one way that we see as helping to build that trust and reducing crime while also protecting the rights of citizens. It does not stop any technology. It only provides a review. It gives this board an ability to say yes or no. It gives this board, before a new technology is approved, it gives annual reviews for the board to see how effective is the technology. Is it impugning the rights of citizens? So I agree with some of the testimony today that the city needs to move forward. We can, but there need to be meaningful checks. We must build trust, and this is one part in accomplishing that. If St. Louis isn't to have any hope of solving its crime problems, it must clean up its police department, and we do have support in the police department of officers who do want to, clean up what is year after year in the news shows to be problematic. St. Louis has been in the news for bad reasons year after year. It is time that our city made the news for reform and progress. I ask that the board pass these rather modest yet meaningful measures which have been passed and are operating in other cities nationwide, including in Nashville as well as on the coast. And so Nashville, Massachusetts, Seattle, and various cities in California. Also, there's a county in California too. You mentioned a county. So we would be, in the future, we could work with a county, the St. Louis County. But right now we're here. But we can do this. The city can do this. It is time for St. Louis to lead for doing right and not by doing wrong.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Change the
Campos.
narrative
Let's go ahead and
of
see
St.
if
Louis.
there are any questions from the committee. Alderman Pam Boyd. Clark Hubbard. Chairman Vaccaro.
I have no question.
Okay, I want to ask you one question, because this came up twice. The mention of the mayor had a draft executive order to deal with it. Now, do you think the mayor was doing something nefarious by drafting something without asking you guys input, or could it just been a draft that may be circulated at a later time? I'm just trying to figure out why is that important to mention.
The mayor's office had the opportunity to work with us.
Right.
Apparently declined to do so, also the members of this board. So I'm referring, there's two aspects here. One is the audit, which was due on September 16th.
Right.
There was no notice to us, apparently no notice to any alders that there was a problem with that until it was brought up by us, hey, this is more than a month overdue. And at that point, then they are saying, oh, we need another 30 days, which, I could only speculate as to why. In terms of the executive order, this is a rewrite of the privacy policy, which also was not shared with us.
The draft. It wasn't an
the,
actual executive order.
Well, they tried to rush that. They wanted this, we know from who leaked this draft that they wanted, it was given to the city officials, various city departments on Monday to be signed off and ready, and before the meeting with persistent surveillance systems with the CEO of that, and with Ross McNutt, which has a proposed side plan.
When was the last time you guys met with Judge Edwards, the public safety director, about this surveillance ordinance?
To my knowledge, I think that was in the spring or early summer.
Okay.
Approximately that time, yes.
Okay.
And we have had multiple meetings with him in the past.
But since the drafting, since the introduction of this ordinance, there was no conversation with the public safety director. Would that be correct?
We had conversations with the public safety director after this ordinance was passed, and as well as in past years, yes.
Gotcha.
But we had nothing from the mayor's office, so we heard nothing from the public safety director in terms of this new executive order, which would be a rewrite of the privacy policy.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your time. Last person is David Boger.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon.
And members of the committee. My name is David Boger. I represent only myself, and I will speak for less than 4 minutes. I have for you 9 copies of an article from the Baltimore Sun, which was published on October 14th, and it concerns their aerial surveillance technology that was proposed to them. And I will not read that article, but would speak a couple of small paragraphs. There's no evidence to support claims by Ohio-based persistent surveillance systems that its spy planes could reduce violent crime by 30% in 1 year, much less subsequent years. One of their planes flew for 300 hours in 2016 over Baltimore secretly for 2 periods of time in which there were 100 murders in Baltimore. How many of these did PSS solve? Definitively none. In fact, the company was only able to offer up information connected with 5 of those homicides, and only one of those cases resulted in a conviction. We don't even know if PSS helped that happen, but it's a safe bet that it did not, because company president Ross McNult would surely tout it if he could. The Baltimore Sun is suggesting...
Mr. Boger.
Yes, sir.
How does this, what you're presenting us, impact this Board Bill 94? Because you're talking about a proposal that was made to the city of St. Louis, and obviously you disagree with it, but we're talking about Board Bill 94 right now.
And I guess maybe I am out of order.
Okay.
And except that if there is going to be a surveillance system that involves aircraft, I would hope that y'all would make sure that it works.
I think you present us with a good example of why we need to have a good policy.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Real quick, I want to ask Ms. Baker if she would come back up. One of the questions I want to ask you that I forgot to ask, you had made mention about the resolution. So it was our understanding that the resolution that Dr. Gaskell was working on, that was supposed to look at how we're currently using data, surveillance data, right, and then make recommendations. The recommendations, I thought was like helping create a policy. What were your thoughts about what the recommendations mean to you?
Yeah, so the recommendations to me mean that based on the data and what would be seen in the audit that does not exist, saying these are the things that we would need to address moving forward in the city of St. Louis. But we know from working in 12 other cities around the country, and we know from working with the St. Louis Police Department and from how current data in our Sunshine Law works in the city of St. Louis, what many of those areas are. And in fact, the recommendations that come out of that resolution from the audit could be used to inform the Director of Public Safety's overall policy. Right. But they are certainly not required to do so. We don't need those recommendations to move forward with that, but he would still have time, even if given 30 days, to incorporate those into the Director of Public Safety's policy for the city of St. Louis that would then be subject to your overall approval or disapproval, because from the passage of this bill, the Director of Public Safety would have 180 days or 6 months to come up with the policy. So those recommendations could certainly be used to inform that, but then you'd actually get to vote on it versus just the mayor creating something.
Gotcha. Okay. The other question is just kind of a curious question. You had mentioned your parents, and they now have a surveillance system. And I know I am finding as alderman more and more of my constituents are investing in surveillance cameras. I mean, I have them all the way around my business. If the police ever needs them, I'll give it to them without a warrant. If it would help solve a crime. And more and more, I think Ring is one of the most popular. People have them at their front doors. And police have been able to actually solve some crimes by going to some of the homes, asking if they happen to see a car go by or different things like that. Do you think that's an invasion of privacy if we have our own cameras and we're looking at our neighbor, we're looking at it in front, but it has a 180-degree camera lens, so I can actually see what's going on at 6 of my neighbor's house? Do you think that's an invasion of privacy?
So I would say we need a policy to address how those are used. And in the instance, for example, of my parents, that they have the Ring doorbell and they have something out back, I forget what it is. It's a motion one. If they wish to plug that into the real-time crime center, which is how police would get access to that information, I think they're thoroughly within their rights to do so. I think we as a city just need a policy that says, how is that data going to be used? Because you're right, you know, if I have my camera positioned directly into your house, we should have a policy that says, I don't get to surveil your house just because, right? There should be a reason that the police are accessing that data to use it. So for example, if there was a crime that happened at your address, then yeah, that's a reason to use that surveillance technology. But there's no reason to be watching that door to see if Alderman Boyd is leaving his house.
Got you, okay. When I think of Facebook, all these social media apps and how people are just putting folks out there, that could be an invasion of privacy. There are some people that don't appreciate that. I've even heard inside of clubs where people may take a picture of people or something's going on, and then the club got sued because somebody saw their face out there and they didn't want somebody to know, so
Yeah.
they felt that was an invasion of privacy. So this thing just
It's
gets
different
to
when
be-
the government's doing it though, right?
Okay.
Right, you know, like if someone takes your picture and they're a private individual and it's not part of a program, they may have violated your individual privacy, but they didn't violate your civil liberties. When the government instead says that they're going to systematically surveil your door for no reason, it's a violation of your civil liberties.
Right, but you don't think it's a violation of somebody's civil liberty if they're out having dinner with somebody and someone takes their picture and put it all on Facebook?
I think they have a right to privacy, but do they have a constitutional claim? I would say no, because the people stripping away that right from them are not the city itself, or not a government entity.
So only if it's the government, there's
That's what this bill addresses,
I
is
understand
the
that, but I'm
government.
just
It has
asking
nothing to
professional
do with,
opinion.
yeah.
I'm just asking your professional opinion because I'm trying to just learn as much as I can. So it's only different if the government does it. Is that what you're saying?
This bill specifically addresses the government.
Forget
In the
bill.
case
Let's
of,
forget the bill. We're not talking about the bill. I'm talking about
My
in your
favorite.
professional opinion.
so if someone is taking your picture and you don't want them to take their picture and they use it for something, or they use it to bully you, you might have claims for a reason there. But you know, for example, I was just on vacation. I'm sure in my pictures, I accidentally took pictures of other people that were there, right? They maybe could argue that I violated their privacy, but I'm not doing that for any particular reason other than they were also next to the thing that I was trying to take a picture of. So there's no real claim there. But if instead I use that to harass them, yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No problem.
They must pay you a lot of money because you got some good answers.
Well, I am subject for an employee review this month, so if you want to pass that along to Tony Rother, that'd be fine.
Okay, I have consulted with the you want to say something? Oh, Alderwoman Pam Boyd? Ms. Baker, somebody else want to tap into your expertise?
Because I keep hearing you talk about the invasion of privacy in the government, and myself, like Alderman Boyd, in our communities, and Tamika Hubbard, the cameras are needed in our communities, and so ironically, and I'm just trying to figure out where this invasion of privacy, if you have people that are doing illegal things and your camera is outside your property and it picks it up, so you feel that's an invasion of their privacy?
I'm glad you're giving me a chance to clarify this. No, I don't think that if your camera picks up illegal actions that it's necessarily a violation of privacy. What I do think is a violation of privacy is if there's no policy in place that says, I can't just surveil your door all the time, because that would be a violation of your privacy, right? So if there's no policy in place that says how that technology is going to be used, I think we're opening up a system that's rife for abuse. However, if you instead have that camera outside your door and it catches someone doing something illegal and you're plugged into the real-time crime center and the real-time crime center has a policy that says this is how we use data to go after specific allegations of criminal action, that's great because that's approved by you all, right? That puts the power back with the elected representatives of the people.
Okay. All right, that's what I just needed clarity, because I don't want my residents freaking and saying, okay, I can't use the cameras.
No, they're definitely allowed to
Okay.
use the camera. It's just saying that when the city is assessing that data and how they use it,
Okay.
that there'll actually be a policy in place that says, no, we're not going to use it to spy on this person for no reason. We're going to use it because we heard that a carjacking happened at this place, and that camera might have footage that would be useful to us, so we're going to tap into it through the Real-Time Crime Center.
Okay, thank you very much.
Alderman Collins Muhammad.
I think the Alderman from 26 had a question. I will go after. Oh, I'm sorry. In the interest of working cohesively with our Chief Technology Officer and our Director of Public Safety, and making sure that we have a perfectly drafted bill that causes no confusion or no unneeded consequences, I ask that we hold Board Bill 94 into the next committee hearing, whenever scheduled by the chair.
So can I ask you, you did say a perfect bill, is that correct? I want to make sure if you putting it out there that you guys want to create a perfect bill, that it's perfect.
I ask that we hold Board Bill 94 until the perfect sponsor comes back with a better content.
All right, well, we're going to hold Board Bill 94. Next Board Bill up is Board Bill 128, sponsored by the same Alderman, John Collins Muhammad, 21st Ward, talking about liquor control.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board Bill 128 is simple. It extends a liquor moratorium that we have placed in the 21st Ward. Just making sure that we do not, right now in my ward I have 7 liquor licenses, and I want to keep it to somewhere around that same number. And this is just assuring that people don't continue to come into our community just selling liquor and not offering any other services or products. It's a very simple board bill, just extending the liquor moratorium.
Anybody on the committee have a question for the Alderman of 21st Ward?
Could you repeat that? Because I'm totally confused with this.
It's a liquor moratorium, Alderwoman Boyd, a moratorium that we passed throughout the city. It's a liquor ban where retailers or anybody with a commercial business cannot just come into your ward and apply for a liquor license. It's extending the liquor moratorium that we currently have.
Oh, okay, so you're just stretching it out?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, no further questions. I move we pass Board Bill 128 out of committee with due pass recommendation. Moving to second, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard, Alderman Ornowitz, Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderman Muhammad, Alderwoman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard,
Aye.
Chairman Vaccaro.
Aye.
It's 5 aye votes.
Okay, Chairman Vaccaro wants to hold Resolution 116 to the next meeting. That will move us on the agenda to the discussion about the RFP. I passed out the draft RFP, which has an issue date of October the 12th, which of course, that's to be changed. We needed to have conversation about the RFP and approve it to be issued, which would render the date changing. And I want to just kind of read a few of the talking points. I think staff did a really good job at trying to help us streamline this process. So the 2020 now will have an online submission created for multiple reasons to streamline the selection process. The RFP document and online submissions, symmetry for elimination of questions and enhanced clarity in the RFP process. It would expedite administration time by reducing number of hours separating documents. It would eliminate cost and time for applicants. Currently, they put it on a flash drive and they have all this paper. Public Safety Selection Committee will have access to all files electronically, easier to manage the selection process. It will reduce redundancy of data entry, which slows down overall process and timelines. It will enforce information collection, get information quickly and efficiently about programming, number of youth served. It would also eliminate unnecessary content that was provided in the previous proposals. Here's some of the things that they've encountered in the past. It was confusion on the RFP and the submission process. Submission process possibly costly for applicants, putting together all these documents. Response are difficult to find within proposals. Vigorous and time-consuming data entry. Administrators had to separate each proposal page by RFP question. Submissions will be include organizational chart of staff resumes for key personnel, program information, organization information, future goals, and key programming details. I actually had an opportunity to visit the Public Safety Department and look at the online process. It's not difficult at all. Some of the challenges that they did have, people would submit their grant allocation, get the award, but they couldn't enter into a contract until they provided their 990 if they were a nonprofit or some other document. And staff was actually, which I found amazing and unheard of, chasing organizations down to get the documentation just to give them the money. I don't know anybody else that do that, and people want to talk about how the city of St. Louis is bureaucratic and hard to deal with, but those are some things that were happening in the past. And also, there's currently about 38 agencies that have funding. In my mind, that is way too many agencies that have funding, and there's only one staff person, along with her supervisor, that kind of helps manage this whole process. I was wondering, actually I'll reserve that, and I'm going to ask questions about the RFP, then I have some thoughts about the allocation of the money. Anybody have any questions on the RFP?
So who is reviewing the RFPs?
The selection committee.
And who
All
are
this information is going to go to Morgan, who works in the Public Safety Department.
But what, I thought United Way was doing that.
Right.
Okay.
So, but staff in the Public Safety Department gets all the information and hands it off. And traditionally, there's a big file box that goes over to United Way with a bunch of flash drives for people to look at these applications, these proposals. And be able to have it online. What's neat about being having it online is they will actually be able to say, of all the proposals, you know, what neighborhood, 5 agencies are applying to support Wells Goodfellow neighborhood. There are a lot of metrics that they'll be able to get out of this. I mean, the online data is going to provide a lot of great information on how to analyze how we're giving this money away and who's actually being served by it. What neighborhoods.
So, last year when we did it, I thought they were supposed to come forth to give us reports of where they were with the organizations that received the dollars. So where is that information?
There was a report given. I emailed it out last week. I wasn't on the Public Safety Committee last year. I don't remember having them come back before the committee, but imagine 38 organizations coming before the Public Safety Committee to...
No, but they were supposed to submit something
Yes.
to us. Yeah, and that's what I was trying to find out.
That should be in the annual. If they were supposed to do it monthly, that probably didn't happen, but the annual wrap-up, that is in your email.
When did you send it?
Last week. I can send it again.
Okay.
It was 2 documents. One was the draft RFP, and the other one was the report, the annual report.
Okay, and I guess my questions that I have, and from me being on it last year, the challenge that I have as a committee person that sits on that, and I know a lot of smaller not-for-profits are struggling to just, trying to just hold on. And then you have these bigger organizations that's getting mega bucks anyway, building buildings. And so my question is it a way that we could streamline how or who, you know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to get clarity on how it can be distributed.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It's something I have thought about myself as well, because I can appreciate small grassroots organizations. Some of them out there doing good work, but they've never been able to get funding, and is do-gooders are spending their own money, their private monies to do things. I think that we should consider doing a set-aside for a certain amount of those organizations. Let's just say 5 of them. They've never received a grant before, but can demonstrate that they're actually doing good work and making a significant impact in the community. I think that we should think about not funding organizations that's been getting funding for the past 10 years, it seems like.
Right, I agree.
We should look at helping organizations that are smaller grow with capacity building grants. So those are some things that, you know, I was thinking about that I think that we should encourage. You know, maybe we would do, I'm just making this up, you know, 5 would get $100,000 for whatever. Another 5 would get, I don't know, $50,000 to $75,000 for capacity building, because they already have a track record. They just need to double in size. So instead of serving, 15 young ladies, they can serve 30.
Right, right.
And then you have those, and we heard at the town hall meeting, there was a lot of passion from some organizations that are out there that are relatively new but are doing good work.
Right.
And we should really consider funding those organizations.
Okay.
So with that, that is certainly something I can bring forth to the, public safety director. But I do think that we should limit the amount of awards that we make. 38 is just way too many.
Yeah.
I mean, we should 15 or 20.
Yeah, that's what I think. And then I was looking at, reviewing I'm assuming the criteria on people to apply. And so that's real interesting to me because some of the objectives that we're asking for, I'd just be curious to see how many of them accomplish that. And that's just a big issue with. And I guess I'm just looking for us to start holding people more accountable, because we issue out millions of dollars and we don't know if it's really happening or not. And that's just my concern.
I think it may be worthy to ask the public safety director or staff to come and present at the next meeting, what agencies have done, to just give a brief overview. I know we've gotten it in our email, but just to give a brief overview, and then maybe if there are some questions that we may have of them, some challenges or some bright spots, that they can share that information.
Okay,
So I would ask the public safety director if he could be present, or a staff member at the next hearing for that. What's new in here, I had a conversation with staff. You'll notice on page 3 of the RFP, attachment 4 is a budget. They submit in the past budgets for their program, but I'm interested to know what's their overall budget. You have, like you said, they have these big organizations, they're getting, their budget is millions of dollars. What is this, compared to their overall agency budget? Or we can look at it and say, well, your agency is only $20,000 agency, but you're asking for $100,000. How are you going to pull that off? So
Yeah.
I thought adding, that is something extra, to just give a snapshot of their overall agency budget and their proposed budget for their program. Any more thoughts on the RFP?
No, it's all yours.
What do you guys think is a maximum number of awards?
10.
10? 10?
It shouldn't
It's
be
only
30.
$1 million, and out of that million, we automatically lose,
As it wind up being 950,000.
500, I think it's like 500,000 that we give to the Department of Public Safety to do the
No,
operation.
John, it say 950,000 on here that we have to work with.
So that's what it is.
Yeah.
I said 500,000, it's $50,000.
Okay.
We automatically give $50,000 to Jimmy's staff to coordinate and do the organization of it, which I don't think it should be.
Right, I don't
It's
either.
so we separating. It's an at-risk. So this is my problem. Last year, Jimmy sent his recommendations to us on who he thinks should get funded, and we funded exactly who he said. And I don't think that he should have I really don't think he should have a say in it. I think it should be solely on the Board of Aldermen and for organizations to come in and present their case. And we've always worked, and I know Maurice has always done, after we do an interview, he's done interviews with people who we recommended to make sure everything aligns, because of course we can't be that detailed trying to interview 50 organizations within, 3 committee hearings or 3 or 4 committee hearings. I think that instead of so the Department of Public Safety should not be managing this process, in my opinion. That's just what I think. And it's something that we discussed last year briefly, but we didn't have a lot of time to change the process. But it's not, so to me, it's not transparent, and it's not inclusive to all other organizations who don't have, just being transparent. It's not inclusive to organizations who don't have a direct relationship with the mayor's office. What this does is it allows us to, because like we know organizations in our wards that could use this funding, but we really don't have a lot of influence over it because we allow, room
And I
for
think
100
that was
to
our challenge last year, as Alderman Muhammad said. We did the recommendations, and then the public safety director came back and gave us recommendations, and we said, that's not who we recommended. So I think what he's saying is, if we're the ones that's making the recommendations, why don't they honor our recommendations?
Well, the ordinance is written, so the Public Safety Committee makes the recommendations to the full board. And the Public Safety Committee only represents 10 agencies. That's it. That is no different than parks allocation, where the Parks Committee will make recommendations on how much funding is going to different parks. Once that money is allocated by resolution, that's it.
I'm confused.
So whatever the Public Safety Committee recommends to the full board is what the Public Safety Department must implement.
So we don't have a say.
We're the Public Safety Committee, yes.
We're-
So it's gonna go to, they're gonna facilitate. There's gonna be a selection committee. Public Safety is gonna work with United Way, right?
Okay.
United Way is gonna score all these agencies.
Right.
They're gonna give them a score.
Right.
They're gonna make recommendations. So it goes to the Public Safety Department. Public Safety is probably gonna make recommendations. It comes down to the Board of Aldermen, but we have access to every agency that got scored, that put in an application.
Right.
And what comes out of this committee to the floor, what passes out off the floor is what's to be implemented.
We don't, it doesn't go to the floor.
But that's
It
not
comes
what
out of here by resolution, so whatever we pass,
John,
that's it, the same as
not what
parks.
happened.
It doesn't go to the full board.
It's not ratified on the floor?
Nope. It goes,
But no, that's
It-
what,
it-
but
it
I'm
is-
saying, that's not what happened. We made the recommendations, and then they came back and disregarded our recommendations and made their own
I
recommendations.
don't know how that was possible.
they shouldn't do
Didn't
that.
they-
That's what,
They-
that is what happened.
I was like, can somebody say that
But
is
they
what
can't.
happened?
It-
Because we challenged
Right, they
it.
can't, but I mean, that's what happened last
But
Saturday.
it is by resolution from this
So-
committee, because the same as the parks, that when the Parks Committee by resolution says this park will get this much and this one will get this much, it doesn't go to the full board. Back in the day, Fred Wessels argued that both things should go back to the full board, but by resolution, once we pass whatever we say, that's the end of it. So if we pick,
We just need to make sure that process happens.
So let's make sure we're all clear.
Right.
So next week, we'll ask the Public Safety Director to come and talk about, the agencies who've gotten funded,
Right,
how well they
right.
did.
Okay.
And be clear
Right,
with this process,
right.
okay? So that we don't have those particular issues.
so Jeff,
So-
I just want to, are we going to are we going to put the date on this today and send the RFPs out starting today?
No, we're gonna approve the RFP and we allow them to put the date on there.
Okay,
It could be next Monday, it could be Friday, but it should be soon.
yeah, because
They're
we,
just waiting on us.
we only have to the middle of next month
Yeah.
to,
Last year it went out in November, so we're not doing too bad.
okay, cool.
So let's go back to the question about how many,
It was due in November.
oh, it was due in November?
Yeah, last year was due
Okay.
in November. In fact, can we just put a date on it today and just send it out?
Well, I don't know logistically how that would impact,
Maurice?
yeah, how that would affect Morgan, how, we have to find out for sure. Why don't we say by Friday? Today is Tuesday. Give it a Friday date. I mean, I just don't know if she can, so that would say she had to leave, so I don't know if she's coming back today and that she could actually get this out today, but I think giving her to a Friday is probably reasonable. Is that fair? Friday? What date is Friday, the 17th? Oh, this is 18th, okay. Yeah, 'cause this was the 12th. The 18th. Oh, that's not 19, okay. All right, so we agree on that. How about the amount of, how many agencies should be funded? I heard 10. At 10, the average award would be 90-something, that's the average, though.
So I was thinking, but I mean, I'm going to leave it up to whatever the subcommittee comes back with, but my thoughts, maybe 5 at 100,000 and 9 at 50,000.
Well, you got a point. We just figure it out when we get everything back.
Right, and that's just, and whatever, yeah, because these guys are going to be reading all that paperwork, not me.
I just don't want to do more than 15. That's just my preference. So do we have to take a vote on the RFP? I'm sorry. Go ahead. No. This is just discussion, we're not doing, go ahead.
What I'm-
But you could tell everybody who you are, though.
I'm Maurice Falls, representative of the President's Office for the Selection Committee on the RFP for.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Glad you came.
And so please, even if you just give the information that we received directly to the President's Office by way of Mary Cullins, the Secretary, I'll get a chance to receive it and review. Some of the things I really want to remind you about how this works is that even though we want to consider a number specific, a lot of companies only ask for like 30, 40, 15, $20,000. And that's where that number really increases up to like 38 because you have the mom and pop, and then they're not year-long, they don't do year-long programs, they only do sometimes just the summer. The biggest concern I have with giving maximum amounts is that once you start to look at these RFPs, you'll see percentages for actual pay to the directors being above what they're spending on the kids. And so a lot of times those numbers get reduced drastically. Like a few of them that really max out at the 100,000 is what the numbers have been previously, is that you had like STL youth jobs asking for 100,000. That was a direct pass-through to MERS Goodwill for their programming for summer jobs. And then you got MERS Goodwill just asking for 35,000 for the Blewett over in the 5th Ward. That's former school that Judge Edwards operated. And so you'll start to see the difference in the amounts of funding that go, and so you'll start to see.
Do we need to vote on this, Vaccaro?
I would say,
Okay, I just want to make sure before you left.
Okay, I think the vote was just on the dates.
The date, we don't have to vote on the RFP date?
To release. No.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just.
All right, well, y'all teaching
you're
me.
fine if we do vote.
Just
Well,
appoint a
Kennedy,
subcommittee.
Kennedy just
Okay.
made it happen, and
Just
then
appoint a subcommittee
Okay.
to go over the
the
proposal.
RFPs. And I just wanted to remind you of that, and then with this new technology, I think it's absolutely going to streamline it and make it very effective. What I did for the Poet Laureate is that we did it online. And so the members of the committee for the Poet Laureate, after we identified the dashboard with IT, that each member of the committee, public safety, as well as subcommittee would get an opportunity with the password to go into that program that was developed for the RFP, and when they answered it, they can go in and see the responses themselves at any time. And so I think it would be really helpful if you looked into that. Just so happened Clemens left, but it came up under Cindy Riordan, the director of IT, and she'll be able to remember it, and it'll work really well for this particular submission. So I just wanted to remind you of the trying to name a certain number of people, and one thing that we did find is that it did represent the city. The awards and the different areas that these opportunities came available to.
Don't you agree 38 is too many?
That's
a lot for one person to
It's
administer.
the money. It really is valued by the money. At the end of it, if we're maxed at 100,000 and you see that one company.
We don't
that
have to
the-
max. I don't think anybody has said anything
Well,
about the max.
but I think they only really, that the maxing at 100 and the minimum maybe at 15, that you got a director asking for 60,000 on a $100,000 budget.
Right.
And then, so of course that wasn't happening, It was far greater than 20% of an administration type of opportunity. We want the money to go to the kids. And so anything less than $1 per kid, per session, it's according down to hours to session and the money
But
required
that's
to
why
the
the budget
hours.
is in here, so we can clearly see that our director
Yeah.
is getting way too much money,
Yeah,
more
and
money
then
than
so
he
when
needs.
it's all leveled out, you got 500,000 left, and so
But
those.
also, Maurice,
But I just wanted to say, for a perfect example of the funding amounts, is like in Pam's ward, there's a program called Throwing and Growing. The first time they only asked for like $7,000 or $8,000. Now that program has grown extensively, and it helps young African-American women.
Well, maybe they need 50,000 this time.
Well, sometimes 50 may be more than they
I
really
understand
need, but that's a matter of fact, that's exactly what they need,
But
anywhere
sometimes
between 30 and 50.
agencies are afraid to ask for a lot of money because they want to get something, so they just
I was
Don't
gonna
ask.
say that, they're scared
should-
to ask for more
Yeah.
because they're fearful of being, one, turned down, and two, they just don't see themselves to that next level. And so, to me, that's where we come in to kind of help them, to let them know that you can grow to the next level.
That's exactly it. Throwing and growing has grown to that point. So what I'm trying to recognize is that starting seed money for the foundations that you say that might have what it takes, but, 50,000 in, because remember, all of this is done. And another point is that to give them some upfront money, because most of this funding is due on that cycle where we pay them back for what they've spent, as opposed to them having some money on the front end. I'm sorry,
I have a
sir.
question. So you say you're on the RFP committee, but isn't it just this committee that decides where that money goes?
Well, the Public Safety Committee does the recommendation of the subcommittee for the RFP.
But we don't, this committee does not have to follow any of the recommendations if we don't want to.
That's correct, but the president of the board also sits on all the committees, and so the
Well, no,
president of the
and
board.
I'm not
would make-
saying, I'm just
Yeah.
saying that, I just want to be clear, and I've been on this for a long time, but my understanding, just like the parks, we send out, we do the resolution, and that's the end of it.
That's
It doesn't
correct.
go to the full board, it doesn't go anywhere else.
It sure doesn't.
And this committee makes that decision. They don't have to follow anything that they don't want to follow.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that, that people here for the first time understand that. We're going to make the
So
final
basically,
decision.
by the president being on every committee, that he
He's
has.
one vote. Okay, Maurice, we
one
have to
vote.
wrap this up. I
Yes,
don't mean to
I'm
cut you
fine
off,
with
but
that.
we've
I
been here
just
a long day. But
About how
if
that
you
can
look at the
actually
RFP
happen.
process, the last page 1 of 2, it kind of talks, or it breaks down step 1 all the way to step 11. Okay, so it's real clear. So they'll know how the money is awarded. We understand how the money is awarded. It's basically just how we just talked about, Alderman Vaccaro. So
Okay.
we're good to go on that. So it's been a long, unless there are any other comments from the committee, I move that Public Safety Committee
Second
adjourn. We're adjourned.
I said, John forget his phone in here?
He looks like.